would you rather wait?
Start.
You all good? Okay,
Yeah.
we'll get started, then I'll call the meeting to order. If we could please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and welcome to tonight's April 27th, 2026 Committee of the Whole meeting for the Milford Board of Education. Ms. Flamme, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Jennifer Brown. Here. Megan Doyle.
Here.
Mary Claire Edmonds. Here. Nicole Flowers. Here. Tom Koba.
Here?
Adam Scobie.
Here.
Hannah Tedros. Here. Nicole Wilhelm. Here. Cindy Wilboyan.
Ms. Wilboyan is trying to get here. She's got some work issues, and if not, she'll be excused.
And Susan Glennon.
Here.
Okay, we have 9 members present.
Thank you. All right. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to have an overview and discuss some potential modifications to the draft long-range facilities plan that was presented to us by Perkins Eastman. We heard a lot of feedback last week at our public engagement session over the effect of middle school going second, on early elementary and pre-K, some safety of portables, retention of staff, impact on staff, environmental impacts, impact of constructions, things like that. So we wanted to take a step back and ask Perkins Eastman to come back to us with some different tweaks, I guess, to the draft, so we can see if we can have any other options. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Mr. Davis.
All right, well, thank you.
Just one thing I wanted to remind people too, I'm sorry. Just a reminder that tonight's meeting is a regular formal board meeting where we do our work in the public in front of the community. It's not participatory like last Monday's event, but there is public comment at the end of the agenda for the public's benefit to share with us anything thinking that they might have. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us back, and thanks for the folks that came to the meeting last Monday at Loth. That was a really engaging conversation. We certainly, to your point, heard a lot of great input and conversation around the different options. So we're going to go through, I'm going to warn you, there's a lot here. So if I go fast, just tell me to slow down. But there's a really significant amount of slides. So I want to make sure we're being as robust and comprehensive as possible. So just obviously introduce yourselves again for folks who have not been part of the process. Just very quickly highlight where we've been, but then we'll spend the bulk of our time in section 3, which is thinking about different phasing and approach to different options and scenarios. There's a few different requests to talk about safety and security. And then we'll end with obviously conversation around what's next. So quickly, Patrick Davis, principal of Perkins Eastman, joined by Mike Berger, who's also a principal, and then Mark could not be here today, but he's been a key part of the project from the beginning. We're in this 4th stage. I think hopefully everyone is sort of caught up to where we've been, but we've approached in with you all in a few different steps, starting with high schools, thinking about the high school portfolio, then jump to the middle schools, thinking about the idea of moving from 3 to 2 middle schools, elementary moving from 8 to 6. And now we're thinking about how do we put all those puzzle pieces together in a way that addresses the needs of the district, both from an experiential standpoint, from a building standpoint, and from a logistical standpoint for families. So we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about this 4th step. I think everybody knows this current portfolio. The district is set up with 8 elementary schools, so 3 on the east side, 2 in the center of the city, 3 on the west side, 3 middle schools, 1 currently in the west, middle, and eastern side. And then we've got law and foreign on the east and west of the district. So we're going to talk about, we're going to start sort of recapping a few of the scenarios. But before we do that, I think it's important, we talked about this a good amount at the meeting last week, and really just sort of acknowledgement of where the district is in terms of building conditions. So I think we've shared previously in a lot of different meetings, most of your buildings were built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and certainly are reaching a sort of critical point in their infrastructure and sort of capital needs. So what this is looking at is what's called Facility Condition Index, which is a measurement of really the sort of capital needs of the building as a ratio compared to the replacement cost of the building. And really the higher the number, it's kind of inverse of how we normally think about data, the higher the number, it's actually the worse you are. You want to have a low number, which means your maintenance costs are lower compared to your replacement value. And typically when you get to the 40 to 50% range is when you need to have really deep conversations about, does it make sense to keep investing in this building, or does it make sense to essentially start over and rebuild? I use the analogy of, oftentimes we've all had cars where you sort of reach a point where you've got a lot of miles in the car, you probably paid it off and you're just sort of, keeping it going. Your transmission goes. Do you have that decision internally? Do we replace the transmission, or are we at a point now where we need to sort of replace the car and buy a new car?
I have a question. So the current column, that is the original Bureau Veritas information from almost 2 years ago, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yep,
Okay,
I should put that on the slide, but yes. So this is based on the data from the consultants that you had walk the buildings 2 years ago. So current is actually current as of those walks based on their report. So at that point it is around 2 years old, so that 10 years is actually closer than we actually think. It's about 8 years away. So as you can see, we've sorted on that 10-year column. The reality is, as we've talked about, it's going to take a number of years before we actually do anything in terms of the capital investment. So most of the investment wouldn't even happen in that 10-year period. But as you can see, we sorted in there, and most of your buildings are reaching that critical threshold of, almost 40%, 40 from an FCI standpoint. Many are exceeding that significantly. So again, your whole portfolio is sort of in the need of major capital investment. The other thing we've talked about previously, I'll just remind you and the folks in the room and who are watching virtually, this is really just looking at the sort of physical assets of the building, right? It's looking at the HVAC system, the roof, the electrical, the plumbing, the structure, all those critical things. It does not address space deficiencies for modern teaching and learning. It does not address what a science classroom should have. It is really just looking at the nuts and bolts of the building and sort of the capital needs to maintain as is. So the costs and the sort of conditions in the building actually go beyond this, and as we think about what 21st century learning looks like. So this is a critical measurement, but it doesn't necessarily tell the complete picture. As we've talked about before, buildings that were built 70 years ago were built for a very different time in terms of instruction. So even just addressing these essentially keeps the buildings as they are. It keeps them warm, safe, dry, critical things, but it does not enhance or sort of improve to sort of align with 21st century learning standards. So, I think everyone here knows, but most of your buildings are quickly reaching that point of major capital needs across the portfolio. So we're going to go through some of the options. We're going to start with the one we presented to you all previously and had some great conversation with the community on. We heard a lot of conversation, and we're going to make sure we're sort of addressing all the things we heard, or as many of the things we heard as possible. So we're introducing a few other concepts for conversation, talking about some of the sort of pros, cons, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that might exist with all of these. Ultimately, it's your portfolio. You guys need to make informed decisions. Our job is to make sure you have a clear understanding of the opportunities and trade-offs that come with it. So we'll start with the one that we previewed and shared previously, which is starting with 2 elementary schools, moving to 2 middle schools, then moving to 4 elementary schools. We'll dive deep into all of these, and then ending with the high schools. We're going to introduce another concept which we've talked about, but share in a little more detail, which is starting with the high schools. Then we're going to introduce a third option, which is a sort of a hybrid of elementary and middle, so starting with 1 middle and one elementary, and then continuing that sequence for phase 2, and then going to elementary and high school. Then we're going to introduce 2 different concepts that look at starting with middle schools. So one with your existing properties in mind, so 2 middle schools, then moving to elementary school, then moving to high school. And then we're going to end with a new one that actually came to light relatively recently, which is starting with 2 middle schools, but perhaps introducing a new property into the conversation and having some dialogue what that might open up for us. So we're going to dive very deep into all of these. So I'm going to keep going. So again, just starting with the first scenario, I won't go too deep in this because we've shared it a bunch of times, but essentially starting with JFK and Live Oaks, moving to East Shore and West Shore, and then sequencing down to the remaining 4 elementary schools, and ending with the high schools. We've got a few different ways to start. We want to make sure this is clear. So we've got a few different ways, and graphically we're going to start to tell the story so it's clear for you all, but also clear for the public. So we're going to walk through a map function of sort of the different steps here. Before I go too deep in, I want to make sure the legend on the right will remain consistent for all of these, so I'll just give a second here to walk through, starting with the icons at the bottom. So the orange triangle is essentially when a school is under construction. So anytime you see an orange triangle, that's when a school would be under construction. A teal or greenish color is an elementary school, a yellow is a middle school, blue is a high school, and then a sort of gray, sort of grayed out version is when the school is sort of reaching their point of closure. You can see the timeline at the sort of top. We're going to sort of work our way through so you can start to see all of the moving pieces. The arrows you'll start to see pop up, those are things showing how students would move, whether they're moving to a swing space, they're going to move to a new building, they're going to move to a permanent location after closure. So you'll start to see how these things sequence through. So in this first scenario, we're going to start with the two construction projects east and west at the elementary school at Live Oaks and JFK. Again, we believe these are properties where you can build elementary schools on the same property next to the existing building. So those students would remain in their current building. No need for swing space. So you'd have active construction safely on the property next to the building locations. Once we move to the next phase, you'll see when the buildings turn green, that means they're done, or sort of they turn into building shapes. And after sort of 2 years of construction, those buildings would be finished at Live Oaks and JFK. And we would start to see some movement. So what would then happen is on the west side, Meadow side would close. The orange lines indicate those students would then be permanently moving to JFK and Pumpkin Delights. West Shore in the green arrow would then move to the previous Meadowside building for their swing space. Similar function on the east side, where Cap Penn students would move to Orchard Hills and Live Oaks. And then the East Shore Middle School would then move to the previous Cap Oaks property for their swing space. As we move on, East Shore and West Shore are now finished. You can see the buildings. We move to Mathewson in the center of the city. Before we do that though, East Shore and West Shore, obviously those students move out from their swing space back to their permanent building. At that point, with the new East Shore and West Shore buildings done, Harborside students would then be rezoned to the new East and West Shore, and Mathewson would then swing into Harborside for their swing space. As we move on, now we've got the 4 new buildings, now 5 with Mathewson being done. Orchard Hills would become construction site next. Those students would then swing to Cap Penn, as you can see in the green arrow. And Harborside would go back, Mathewson would go back to their new building. Orchard Hills is still under construction. Orchard Hill is now done. We move to Orange Avenue. The more Orchard Hill students go back. Orange Avenue students go to Harborside for their swing space. And now we're going to have a new Orange Avenue. Then we move back to the west side. Pumpkin then goes, Orange Avenue students go back. Pumpkin students, they should actually go with the other, they go to Meadowside for their swing space, and they're under construction, and then they're done, and then we move to the high schools. So that's sort of, it's a lot to take in. I'm happy to go back and sort of replay anything that makes sense for you all, but tried to sort of walk through all the moving pieces, and finally, the Meadowside students are there. So we're at the, go backwards. Now we're finished with the full portfolio. So that is scenario 1. We heard some feedback on that. Obviously, this is not going to encapsulate everything we heard, but a few of the overarching comments that we heard that were sort of thematic of some of the conversations we were having. There was a lot of conversation about the starting with high schools, right? This idea of how do we start where students wouldn't have that sort of elementary, middle to high school experience in or near construction sites or swing space. So there's a lot of appetite for thinking about starting with high schools. A similar sort of conversation around starting with middle schools. So a lot of conversation around that. There was a lot of conversation, in particular from Cap Penn and Meadowside students with that previous scenario. Thinking in particular about those early, the sort of younger students, particularly the students that are in kindergarten now. As it's been shared, current kindergarten students at Calf Pen in Meadowside would go through the process, they would close. When it's their time, they would actually move to Harborside for 1 year of middle school. That building would then close and they'd have to go back to East Shore or West Shore, which obviously is a concern. We don't want to have students sort of having these one year moves and whatnot. So there was a point of conversation for many families around how do we sort of ease the burden on those families that don't have multiple moves. So instead of going to Harborside for a year and then back, is there a way we can structure this plan so that don't have as many moves? And then overarching, nothing in terms of changing the scenarios, but I thought it was important because it came up a number of times. Many families and sort of representatives and participants sort of voiced concern about, is this actually going to happen? Is it achievable? So thinking about the sort of long-term financial viability of the plan. So just, we're going to cover most of these tonight. So scenario 2, we'll explore that high school option. Scenarios 4 and 5, we'll dive deeper into starting with middle schools. And then we started to sort of thinking about this sort of idea for the last one around how do we minimize that sort of short-term move and then another move for students. And some of the things we've thought about, we've done in the past, is actually more through a policy initiative rather than a sort of physical solution. So for example, you could say, any student that's currently at an elementary school that may be zoned to say Harborside, rather than going to Harborside for a year, is there a policy you can put in place that those students remain with their cohort and just go straight to East Shore and West Shore? So you have a reduced or no 6th grade class at Harborside. So again, those students would not have to go to Harborside for 1 year, then back. They would go straight to East Shore and West Shore. So that's more of a policy thing just to consider and think about. Ultimately there's going to be a grade or two that you have to think about, and they may have a sort of a different journey, but there might be policy solutions to resolve some of that. So.
And this would work no matter what middle school we're talking about, I think, correct?
Yes.
Is that just an example?
Yeah, it's just an example of, So I just want to sort of put it out there that it doesn't need to be sort of a physical solution always. There could be
Right.
sort of assignment
Okay.
policy that, and it could be a temporary thing, right? You don't want to have in perpetuity these sort of outlier exceptions, but you could have a 1 year or 2 year sort of exception for a subset of families that would feel a burden of moving and moving again. So thinking about some of these policy initiatives might be important to think about. Sorry, I'm going to try to hydrate because there's a lot of sides. Okay, so the other thing we want to make sure we did, there was a lot of conversation about, I don't understand what this means for my current 2nd grader or my kindergarten. So we're going to walk through a few of these. We don't have it for every single scenario, but I think we want to hear the conversation. We're happy to dive deeper into any of these, but using this one as an example. So we're going to start with 2 JFK students. This would be the same thing as Live Oak. It's basically the same pattern. We picked JFK just randomly. But we've got Jordan that's starting kindergarten fall of 26. And we've got Lena who's going to be a 1st grader, so a current kindergarten student this year at JFK. So as we think about their sort of journey, as mentioned, Jordan is in kindergarten next year, starting next school next year. They will start in JFK, again, it could be Live Oak. Lena is a 1st grader, so she'll be a 1st grader next school year. Nothing is going to change as is. Their building will be as it is today. As they progress in the timeline, Jordan is a 2nd grader and Lena is a 3rd grader. Construction will start. So they'll have active construction on the site that is safely away from the students. We've talked a lot about in the last few meetings about hiring the right contractors and teams to make sure that it's done appropriately. But again, it's something that's done across the country and certainly across Connecticut, where they would have construction happening on the property next to their school building. But as they start 2nd and 3rd grade respectively, construction would begin at their school. As they move on, Lena's in 5th grade, and they will move into the new JFK. So when Lena is a 5th grader, she'll be in the new building, and same with Jordan actually that should probably be 4th grade, sorry. The building will be done, he'll be in that building for 4th and 5th grade. When Lena's in 6th grade, this is JFK, they would move then to a swing space for a year as they wait for the middle school option. So we moved up a few years, but thinking about their middle school experience, Jordan will finish the school at the new JFK, but Lena will start her first year in swing space for West Shore. In grade 7, Lena and her classmates would then move back to the middle school, and Jordan would start his journey at the new West Shore Middle School. So Lena would have, next year's first grade students would have 1 year in swing space for middle school. So then we've got their high school journey, 2034. Both of them are going to start and finish high school before the construction is to be scheduled for their high school. Okay, so moving on to the next school, we've got Orange Ave, we've got Nia. Nia, again, is a kindergarten student next year. With Orange Ave being further out, she's actually going to go through her whole elementary school journey without having to be in swing space or near construction. She would have the benefit of starting her new middle school in a new building, whether that's East Shore or West Shore. So her first year in middle school would be in a new middle school. And similar to the previous one, she will start high school at law or foreign before the construction is finished. So she'll go through a high school experience with some investments over the next few years programmatically, but the major projects would not impact her. And then finally, we've got Noah, who will be at CAF Penn. So Noah is a current kindergarten student in 2025, so next year he'll be in first grade. When CAF Penn closes in 2030, he'll be in grade 5. He will get reassigned to an elementary school through a boundary process. And this is what I was talking about before. Previously, he may have been zoned to Harborside, and he would have had 1 year at Harborside and then have to move when Harborside closes. So as we talked about, there could be some policy solutions that put in place where instead of going to Harborside, maybe Noah goes, all of his cohort and all of his friends go directly to East Shore or West Shore, and they would begin their experience in the swing space for the middle school. So again, not having to go to Harborside, then to East Shore and West Shore, so minimizing the amount of moves for Noah. And then same thing with the previous other ones. They would have their high school experience as is, some upgrades and improvements as needed, but the major project would happen after Noah goes to high school. Okay, so I'm going to move to a new one, which we've talked about, but just to show graphically, we don't have as many sort of graphics as this one, but just sort of introduce the idea of starting with the high schools. So just given the cost of a high school, it's unlikely that the district could probably do 2 high schools at one time. So we would have to stagger the 2 projects just from a cost standpoint. So starting with law, then moving to foreign, and then the rest actually follows that same path from scenario 1. Really the tail end of this after the high schools could really take on any of the sort of subsequent scenarios as well. We left it at scenario 1, but essentially we want to talk about what this does. The biggest thing, as you can start to see, and if you look back to the previous one, where it says the last school year for each of those schools, it actually pushes us out pretty significantly. So the middle schools, the elementary schools wouldn't close until school year 34 or 35, and Harborside would not close until school year 38, 39. So about 13 years would be the last school consolidation. So this one is certainly possible, but there's a conversation for you all to have around, obviously, a lot of the intent of the RFQ is talking about portfolio size. This really delays some of those decisions around consolidation and pushes those out quite far into the plan. So as I just talked about, because of the cost, you probably only do one at a time, pushes the closures out. There is a scenario in which I don't know that I recommend it, but certainly for you to discuss. Obviously, in the way it's constructed, closures happen after construction projects. So ideally, like for example, Harborside would close after East Shore and West Shore. If the sort of delay of closures is not something you want to do, or consolidations, there is a world in which you could close before you construct, right? You could close the buildings, I would say you will need to add portables across the portfolio for elementary and middle school to accommodate the students. But it's a discussion point for you all to consider. If delaying those, up to 13 years is not palatable for you all, you could, if you wanted to start with high schools, think about the idea of closing some schools without tied to construction. It would require temporary capacity at all of the sites essentially to accommodate the enrollment. So again, not something we're recommending, but it's certainly a discussion point for you all to think about. So the major thing here is it's possible for start with high schools, but obviously the downside is it pushes a lot of those school consolidation decisions out at pretty far ways, unless you want to close before any investments. Okay, so introducing a third option, which is a little bit of a hybrid of elementary and middle school. So starting with one middle school, one elementary, doing the same thing for phase 2, then finishing elementary schools and ending with high schools. So the way this would work is we would start at West Shore and Live Oaks. So have a middle school on the west side, elementary school on the east side. Again, we think Live Oaks could accommodate elementary school through construction on site. This would require, in order to start a middle school in this scenario, it would require to close Harborside. And you need to free up the swing space for the West Shore students. So this scenario in the current construction would require to close Harborside so that the West Shore students would have a building to swing into. We don't believe West Shore could accommodate construction on site. So that is a significant change in this scenario where you would close Harborside. Those students would get allocated to East Shore and West Shore through a boundary process. And then some students would go to East Shore. Some students would actually remain on site, but as part of the West Shore program and be there for swing space. We'll talk about the sort of moving pieces. We would do the same thing on the flip it basically. So then we would do the middle school on the east side, elementary school on the west side. At this point, by 2030, you could close Cap Penn because you're creating additional capacity at Live Oaks. And then by 2032, you would be able to close Meadowside as you create additional capacity on the west side. And then you would step down with the remaining elementary schools and high schools. So again, sort of showing it visually. So we would start first by closing Harborside. Those students would then get distributed east and west to East Shore and West Shore. We would then start construction at West Shore and at Live Oaks. And then the West Shore students would then swing to Harborside. So after Harborside closes, that building is now open for swing space. So West Shore would swing there. Again, Live Oaks would remain on site, where construction would happen next to them in their current building. They'd remain in their current building. And we keep going down the line. After a few years, you have a new Live Oaks and a new West Shore. And then you start construction at East Shore and at JFK. Again, JFK is another site we believe you could build a new elementary school on site, but East Shore is not one you can do that. So the East Shore students would move to Harborside for swing space for the green arrow. The West Shore students would go back to their home. Cap Penn students would then be allocated, redistributed and redistricted to Orchard Hills and Live Oak. So a lot of moving pieces with this. Keep going construction. After a few years, you finish East Shore and JFK. Then you start construction at Mathewson. The East Shore students go back to their home, a long-term new building. Mathewson students then swing to Harborside during their construction project. Meadowside would then, at this phase, close as we create additional capacity at JFK. Those students would go to both JFK and Pumpkin Delights. And then we have a new Mathewson. We move to Orange Ave. Mathewson students go back to their new building. Orange Ave go to Harborside for swing space. They finish the building, continue on the line to Orchard Hills, They go to swing space at Calf Pen, and then finish at Pumpkin on the elementary side, where those students would then swing to Meadowside, and then we move to the high schools. So that scenario. The key thing there is two things. One, it would require you to close Harborside before any investment in buildings. That's a discussion point for you all to think about. The other thing it does, which I didn't talk about, it puts a lot of pressure on the Harborside property. So essentially you're dividing the middle schools early into two sides. You're gonna have enrollment around 600, 650. We've talked a lot about the sort of property constraints that exist at Harborside. What you have to do, because Harborside's gonna be swing space for both middle schools in this scenario, it would have to accommodate 600, 650 students. There is space to put some trailers. We think you can fit about 6 trailers, which is sort of the minimum you need to accommodate the enrollment. So you basically, in there, you would take over the basketball courts that are on the Harborside property. You would put trailers there. We've also talked a lot about sort of what we call the big box spaces being already undersized. So your cafeteria would be strained still, your gym is strained. So you're adding more kids to the property on a really small property already. It's physically possible to put the trailers there, we believe, but it may create some operational challenges in terms of scheduling gym and cafeteria and all those things that require big box spaces. So you're gonna have 200 more kids or so in the building. So thinking about the operational impacts of that will be important. So some key questions. A, are you okay closing Harborside before they move into a new building? So closing before any of the construction projects. And then are there concerns operationally about having 600 plus students on the Harborside? So those are critical questions for us to talk about with this scenario. I think if the answers are no to this, then this scenario might not be viable because you need the swing space. Okay, so moving to fourth. So this is a different one, where we start with 2 middle schools. So the last one was 1 middle school, 1 elementary school. This is starting with 2 middle schools. And this was actually part of a conversation we had last Monday. So this is a little bit different. So the way to think about this one is basically utilizing the JFK and Live Oaks property to accommodate the middle school construction. So again, we think there's space. We'll talk about some diagrams we've drawn up to show that. To accommodate basically building a middle school at Live Oaks while Live Oaks students remain in their building. So you're constructing a middle school on the Live Oaks property. And the same thing with JFK. So you would build the middle school on the JFK property while JFK students are still there. That would become the long-term home of the middle schools. Then you would swap their properties and say the long-term home for Live Oaks would be the East Shore property. The long-term home for JFK would be the current West Shore property. So it's basically a sort of land swap between the grade types. We'll talk about some of the challenges in a little bit, but that's the key concept here is utilizing the larger parcels at the elementary schools to build and start with those middle schools first. And then you sort of sequence through after that. It's important to recognize, we'll talk about some of the challenges with this. There's a bit of a hiccup in terms of swing space availability, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But this would allow you to close Harborside after the construction of 2 elementary schools. So compared to the last one, the scenario has Harborside closing after the middle schools are constructed. And then you could step down and start thinking about the elementary schools. After that, again, we'll talk about some of the challenges. But before we do that, just to sort of recap, the Live Oak and JFK site, again, are 2 of the larger properties actually in the portfolio. Based on the conversation we did, want to explore the idea of building the middle schools on those properties and those becoming the long-term home for the middle schools. So just to sort of test it out, we built a program for what a 650 student or capacity middle school might look like. You need about 120,000 square feet. So you can see the sort of dotted red line. That is the current, in this case, Live Oaks building. The blue would be a 3-story middle school. Again, not a lot of architecture here, but the square footage is to scale and to match the program needs. The other thing to sort of recognize and acknowledge about this site, but also many sites, as we've talked about, there are some wetland constraints on a lot of your properties. So in this one in particular, that white dashed line is basically a 100-foot setback from any of those wetlands. So basically moving out 100 feet from where the wetlands are. So we can fit the building, as you can see, it sort of tucks in the back of the property. Again, we would need to make sure that the red outline stays operational, so Live Oaks students would remain on site, and you would build the middle school essentially in the back of the property. My personal opinion, it fits, it works. Is this the right sort of long-term positioning for a school on a property? I don't know that I would find a blank slate. I would say, let's put the school in the way back of the property, so you might be sacrificing some of the long-term sort of design of that campus by trying to fit it in there. Again, it fits. If your main concern is sort of logistics and starter and middle schools, it can happen. But there's a question on, does this make sense from the 30 to 50 year sort of horizon of what a property could be? We tend to like have a little more civic presence closer to the street, but again, we're sort of at a blue box stage here without much architecture, but it does push the building really far back into the property just to fit it. So possible to fit a middle school there. So again, to sort of talk about the phasing, the current campus is in the upper left. Your phase one is building the middle school next to the active and sort of occupied Live Oaks site. Phase two, you would actually then go demo that Live Oaks building, turn that part of the property into fields and outdoor learning and parking and all the other outdoor amenities we want to see. So that's how it would sequence through. Similar study for JFK, which is a much larger property and obviously less concern about fitting it. Again, you'd have a 3-story structure on the sort of planned southwest portion of the property, and you would go through a similar phasing of building the new building on that property, and then you would demolish the existing JFK sites, and then ultimately turn whatever the current building location is into needed outdoor amenities, whether that's fields, parking, all that stuff you need on the site. The one thing to also, I think we touched on a little bit, is it can fit. I think it does create some logistical challenges, as we'll talk about here in a second. So sort of walking through this one does get a little complex. So again, we would start construction of middle schools at Live Oaks and JFK. So those orange triangles, it's important to recognize those JFK students and Live Oaks students would be on a construction site, but it's actually not their building long-term. It would be the long-term home of the middle schools. Those would then finish, and East Shore students would then move to the new East Shore building on the Live Oaks property. West Shore students would move to the JFK property for their new West Shore property. You would then move to, at that point, Harborside would then close. They would go to the new newly constructed middle schools on East and West. You would then start construction on JFK. They would move to Harborside. So after Harborside closes, that actually becomes the only building that's open for swing space. So we'll talk about why this opportunity may not be entirely feasible. We'll talk about how to solve that here in a little bit. But after JFK goes to Harborside, it could be either way. Live Oaks could go first, or vice versa. The reality is there's only one swing space. So Live Oaks really doesn't have anywhere to go. So those students would have to remain in that building until you open up additional swing space or close schools. You could close Cap Pen early, but again, with the mindset of trying to build as much as possible, Live Oaks would not have an active swing space location to go to because JFK would then move to Harborside. Again, you could switch it so that Live Oaks goes to Harborside and vice versa, but you are swing space short. Assuming we can solve that, you sort of follow down the path of going back to the JFK, and then lose myself here on the map. At this point, you would close. So new Live Oaks is open at the previous East Shore. Calf Pen would close and split between Live Oaks and Orchard Hills. Then you move to get to the center of the city, Mathewson, go into Harborside, then you move to Orange Ave, again going to Harborside. The Calf Pen students would then, the Orchard Hill students would then go back to their home. And then we move to the high schools. So real challenge here is what do we do with either Live Oaks or JFK students during construction? So again, to sort of illustrate that, we've got Jay and Nia and Sammy. So Nia and Sammy are kindergarten students at Live Oak and JFK. So they're both current kindergarten students. As they move to in grade 5, those students, there's only one swing space. So Sammy who's a JFK student, would go to Harborside, and Mia wouldn't have a swing space, or sorry, Nia would not have a swing space to go to. So again, sort of illustrating, once the kids, next year's kindergarten students would not have a swing space once they're in 5th grade. So something that needs to be solved. As they progress into middle school, they would have the new buildings at their actual former sites. So they would move into the middle schools on both the JFK and Live Oaks properties. I didn't mention Jay too much, but he's got a nice path where, again, he starts and finishes high school before those projects begin. And the same thing with Nia and Sammy. Their high school experience would not be a part of the construction activity. So I mentioned the sort of challenge with this one, that JFK and Live Oaks would have construction next to them for a building that's not ultimately theirs, but they both need swing space. And the way the scenario is currently constructed, Harborside would be the only one open for swing space, unless you're closing one of the elementary schools early again. So this idea of closing a building before new buildings are open for them to go to. So the key question is, would you prefer, if you like this scenario, would you prefer going one at a time? Another way to alleviate it is not have concurrent projects, so you don't do East Shore and West Shore at the same time. You do East Shore first or West Shore first, then they go to Harborside, the other one starts their project. So it delays the projects, which is an option. But if you wanted to have concurrent middle school projects, you would have to probably close one of the elementary schools early and use that as swing space if you wanted to start with the middle schools. But it might be solvable as we introduce scenario 5. So as I mentioned, this is the last one. So as I mentioned earlier this week, we actually, in conversation with the district, there was some conversation about a potential property on the west side that might be open for exploration. So that is 14 Benham Ave. It's the current, I'll show on a map here, where it's just to the east of the current West Shore building. It's actually a good size. I mean, not as big as we would want, but it's almost 10 acres, 9.4 acres, where it's the current Boys and Girls site. Apparently they have a new home nearby that they'll be moving to. There are some other functions on the property. There's a police training center and a few other activities, but based on conversations, it might be a property that might be open for conversation. So if we could fit this into the equation, it might alleviate some of the swing space challenges we talked about in scenario 4, and we'll talk through how that might be. So in this scenario, we would use that new property for West Shore. So West Shore, we would start construction on that property. The other thing that's nice about the property is it's flat, kind of open, kind of a blank slate to start from. So you would start with constructing the new West Shore on that property. East Shore, and again in this scenario, would be at Live Oaks. Again, if you want to start with 2 middle schools. The east side is a little bit more difficult to find space. So again, the property that has the available land is Live Oak. So you would start on the west side and the new property for West Shore. You would start building the middle school on the Live Oaks property for the future East Shore. Then you would move down the line into Live Oaks, JFK, and sort of following down the line of elementaries and then middle schools. So to sort of play this one out, the red marker on the map is that new property. So again, just to the east of West Shore. So in this scenario, we would start by constructing the sort of future West Shore on that property. East Shore, again, would be at Live Oaks. Live Oaks students would remain there. West Shore students would remain in their current building while construction is going on the new property. Once that's done, you would have a new middle school at the new property for West Shore. You would have a middle school on the Live Oaks property for East Shore. And at that point, obviously those students would then move to the new buildings. And errors are a little bit out of order, but Harborside would close. So Harborside students would close after the new buildings on the east and west. That then opens that building up. So Live Oak students would then swing to Harborside for their building. JFK students would come down to the existing West Shore building. That would now be open because they are moving to the new property. So that solves that swing space sort of logjam we talked about in scenario 4. So at this point, for their program. And then we're going to finish building the Live Oaks and JFK building. So Live Oaks would go to the former East Shore site. JFK would go to, actually I think that might be wrong. JFK would go to the former West Shore property. Phone's ringing. I think back, you'd start Orange Ave or Mathewson. They would then sort of go to Harborside after that. Meadowside and Pumpkin Delight Meadowside would close. Those students would go to JFK and Pumpkin Delight. Orchard Hills would go to Calf Pen after they close.
The other way around.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And then you would move to Pumpkin Delight and Mathewson, sorry, Calf Pen would go to Live Oak and Orchard Hills. Mathewson would go.
Can we go back to the beginning of this one for a minute?
Yeah, that
So,
arrow might be out of order. Sorry.
I find this intriguing, this scenario. I see it happening a little bit differently, but I think it potentially solves some problem, but I'm not sure that we can accommodate doing 2 middle schools at the same time with this scenario, but I think
Financially?
Well, no, I think, if we were to build a new West Shore Middle School on this site, then that frees up West Shore Middle School to be swing space for East Shore and Harborside, before we actually shift people into.
That's a long ride.
It is a long ride, but it's doable. I mean, none of these are going to be perfect scenarios. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect solution. So it is a long ride, but it also, I think, decomplicates the
It certainly helps. So I'm sorry, to make sure I'm following, you would build West Shore on the new property.
Mhm.
That frees up the West Shore building.
Building for swing space.
And then you would move East Shore all the way to the west side and utilize
Right,
that.
well, you either put East Shore into the new West Shore building temporarily, or you, well, you could put them, well, I don't know that all the kids would fit at that point. You need to rebuild East Shore too. So it was just a thought, that I think there's different ways we could look at this one.
I should say, there's probably a million ways we could look at any of
Yes,
any of
correct,
these.
yeah. But with what you just presented, it assumes that we're doing 2 at once.
It assumes, you're doing East Shore at Live Oaks and
Right.
West Shore at the new property, which at that point Harborside could those buildings will be built to serve half the middle school population on both sides.
Right, that's, yeah, right,
Yeah.
correct. And then Live Oaks would ultimately end up in a.
Live Oaks would go to Harborside for swing space. I don't know if there's
Where would they would end up in the East Shore, the current East Shore building?
Yes, ultimately
as-
they would end up in the East
In
Shore.
the end, at the end,
Yes.
right, okay. That's what I wasn't really clear on that.
Yeah,
so.
sorry, that's a lot going on a little bit.
All right, okay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, no. Yeah, it's complicated, so I can just start everything. It's good to talk through some of these things. So, again, you would start with West Shore at the new property, construct the middle school for East Shore at Live Oaks. Harborside would then, just go through here. So the orange arrows represent Harborside students going to a new permanent location at the newly constructed East Shore and West Shore. The Live Oak students would then, in the green arrow, swing to Harborside, and you would start constructing Live Oaks at the previous East Shore, or the current East Shore building. So that's the move on the east side. And your concern about constructing both, can you sort of elaborate on why you don't?
Well,
think
I
you
mean,
could
I
do
think
concurrent?
financially it might be
Yeah.
difficult, but I just had a different thought in my head, that's
Yeah.
all, yeah. And then the other piece is in terms of the JFK, we could still build, if we wanted to maintain that property, we could still build a new JFK on that property, and then the old West Shore would become ultimately a space that we would have to decide what we're gonna do.
Yeah, you're gonna have one
City.
extra property on the west side. It's
Uh-huh.
either JFK or
Right, okay.
or West Shore.
All right,
So the way we've currently constructed the plan is JFK students would swing to the current West Shore property, build JFK on their current property. So at the end of it, you'd have a new JFK. On the west side, you would have a new West Shore on the new property. Then you open up the previous West Shore building for future conversation around alternative use or disposition. Obviously, a conversation for you all to have, but at the end of the day, you would have a new East Shore at Live Oaks. Live Oaks would switch to the current East Shore building, and JFK would be in the current spot, West Shore would be a new building, and then the previous West Shore, the current West Shore building would be open for.
and this would alleviate the need for any portables, most likely.
You still might need some at the elementary level for CAF Penn students, particularly at Orchard Hills. Again, it comes down to sort of the.
So
the
I'm not
zoning.
understanding where that's coming in.
So essentially, you're going to,
CAF Penn would, I think we need to remember that with the redistricting, this is just kind of generic, but CAF Penn kids would go, everything would kind of shift to the east and to the west in
yeah.
terms of the redistricting.
Sorry, I mixed
So-
that up. You would actually finish Orchard Hills before CAF Penn is close as you actually wouldn't in this scenario. But yes, it would alleviate the need for particular middle school portables. Utilizing Harborside as a middle school swing space would require portables on that property.
For middle school.
Yeah.
And in terms of the 3 stories, under the current scenarios that you presented to us, did any of those, were you anticipating 3 stories for any of those?
We anticipated for the middle schools.
You did.
You would have more flexibility on the West Shore, the new property on the west side. So you basically have an open plot of land.
Mhm.
You would definitely need to do 3 stories for East Shore at Live Oak. Go back to those. Sorry, a lot of clicks.
And rebuilding the East Shore and West Shore on their current sites, that was anticipated to be three stories as well, under your current scenario?
In terms of.
What you presented originally?
If they were to go to swing space, yes. Yeah, to maximize the amount of outdoor space, you would have a good portion of that. Probably the academic bar in particular would be
Mhm, okay.
3 stories, so that you could try to fit fields and whatnot on the property.
I think that would look really weird in the Live Oaks neighborhood. That's a very suburban neighborhood.
Mm.
Whereas the East Shore location is far more busier, and like a 3-story building would look strange over there. A 3-story building would look strange in the Live Oaks. It's like a neighborhood. Where the current middle schools are now, They're very busy areas, there's businesses over there, it's just a whole different vibe. When you're looking at a three-story building in a very suburban neighborhood, which Live Oaks is.
Yeah, I don't blame you. We originally had if you can see the sort of cutout on the south side, we actually had the building originally there, but we were concerned about sort of the tall building in the residential neighborhood. So we did push it back where it's, most of the structure is away from the residents. You've got the wetlands on the backside, but obviously you want to be sympathetic to the neighborhood you're in. So it certainly would be a concern point I'm sure, for families and neighborhoods.
I have a question. What you were saying, so if West Shore is finished, then Harborside students, there would be part of Harborside students that would be redistricted to West Shore. Would there be room to, since you're gonna have, I don't know what the population is that would be redistricted, but could East Shore kids move to Harborside? There's now a smaller population at Harborside because some of them have shifted.
Yeah.
And then we build a new East Shore on East Shore.
Side, yeah.
I think in that instance, there might be need for some portables, but not a lot.
But I think that that's better
Yeah.
because we're not transporting kids all the way across
I don't
town.
disagree.
Yeah, you would have to still accommodate, you would have, let's just say, for an even numbers, you'd have half the Harborside going east and west. You would need about 600 seats, so you would probably need about 100, 120 additional seats at Harborside to accommodate East Shore plus half of Harborside.
And Harborside had 600 kids in it at one point, so I know we're using space differently right now, but
Yeah.
I think it's something to consider, especially considering that I really wouldn't be okay with the middle school. I think of walkers and families. You know, middle schoolers can walk in those busier areas, but when you're talking about putting an elementary school where East Shore currently is, I just don't think that's a family-friendly walker neighborhood where Live Oaks is.
And then we build Live Oaks on the existing site and JFK on the existing site.
and you're referring to this last scenario, right, using the
Yes.
new space?
Yeah, using,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
that's
more-
it's what land,
That's more what I was thinking.
yeah, is that, okay. Yeah, no, because I agree with you that I like this,
The idea of the new site over where Simon Link is.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that when you presented it, I like that idea, I think that's a great spot for a middle school. I just I'm not okay with the middle school on the Live Oaks site.
And, I mean, certainly the fact that the building is being used right now would have to be addressed.
That's true.
Yeah,
And might not be something that could be done
right away.
right away in order to allow us to do middle school first, for instance.
Right.
I know that Boys and Girls Club is building a new building, but they haven't even, I don't think they're that far along with that process, so. I'm
Could
not
it be the plan, I mean, I know the idea, the hope, or the thinking is to start with middle school, but if there had to be a delay because of the usage, that could still be part of the
Correct.
plan.
I agree, and I think that as I thought this through during the week, the swing space issues aren't necessarily dependent upon first and second. They can be worked out throughout the process, like when we get closer to the process. But I think that the original plan of starting with JFK and Live Oaks and building a new building there, and then doing this with the middle schools, having a new middle school at this new site, and then we follow the same process we had intended to follow with East Shore originally.
It gives you the swing space.
You could potentially do scenario 3. The way we have it right now is West Shore first, but you could flop it so that East Shore and an elementary school potentially go concurrently to give you more time for the sort of property acquisition or sort of use. So you could start with East Shore and JFK if you want to have two projects going at once. So JFK could build on their own property as we sort of originally proposed. East Shore would build, but it would require Harborside to close early in this sort of scenario.
Well, it's technically not closing. I mean, you're taking half the kids and shifting them to their new
West.
school, West Shore, and then East Shore would shift into the Harborside for swing space with the remainder of the Harborside kids. That's the idea, correct?
Yeah.
I would say in this one, though, you would have to add portables at West Shore and
Why at West
Harborside
Shore?
for half of the Harborside.
Well, they're gonna be there anyway. The new West Shore building we're talking
Oh,
about.
but in order, you need swing space. So you would need to close Harborside before Harborside becomes available for swing space.
I'm not following you.
In that scenario, East Shore starts, not West Shore, to allow for time to.
Oh, correct, if
Yeah,
East
yeah.
Shore, yeah, no, I would say
Yeah.
West Shore first.
But
Yeah.
we run into that issue.
Well, and to start East Shore first would be building on Live Oaks' lot.
Not necessarily.
No, you'd have to take, you would shift the kids from East Shore into a swing space.
Which would be Harborside.
Right.
probably the only-
Yeah.
And so you would need to do, you'd need to do a new building on the west side for middle school first.
Yeah.
Because that's gonna be then a larger building, it can accommodate more kids. And it should be able, I mean, if it's gonna be the middle school, it should be able to accommodate current middle school students and about half of the Harborside students. So then you're left with half of the Harborside students with East Shore that would swing into Harborside, but you might need some portables while the construction's going on. And then they all go to East Shore when East Shore is done, then Harborside's retired.
Construction would start for, we're talking, let's say we decided that to, whatever plan, the construction starts, what, a year or two from now?
2.
2 years from now, maybe
Further than
2
that.
years, they couldn't figure
Construction
out-
would probably start 3 years from now.
So, we couldn't get a timeline from the Boys and Girls Club or even from the Police Academy, like for 2 years out. That's
That's
a long
true.
time.
Well, we might.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might.
That's a good point.
It's not like we're telling them to do it like next month or something, like 2 years.
That's true.
Yeah.
And they'd have to be amenable to it, but, they would ultimately, at some point in time, get a new building that they could, it's like, almost like a swap for them
Yeah,
in
that's
terms
true, they
of
could go to the exact.
wherever. That's to be determined, but they,
I have a thought about this scenario. So if something that has been raised in a lot of the community sessions has been Pumpkin Delight's traffic and the fact that it's on a dead-end road. And looking at the map, Pumpkin Delight is super close to this other site. I also see that, going back to the FCI list, right now Pumpkin Delight is on the lower end, but in 10 years, which is really 8 years, which, if my math is right, that's 2034, they're number 3 on the list. So, is it possible that it makes sense, just like forgetting everything else for a minute about swinging and timeline and when it all happens, from a traffic standpoint? And you've said multiple times, traffic is one of the biggest safety hazards
Yep.
that exist in especially elementary schools. Would it make sense to move Pumpkin to that space versus moving JFK or moving West Shore?
And Pumpkin's the property you find alternative use or disposition for in the long term?
Potentially.
Yeah.
It was just an idea
I mean,
based on
we have-
the traffic.
I think there's a couple issues. One, we literally just closed the project on Pumpkin 2 weeks ago. And so we are about to get reimbursed from the state, depending on what level we are. And then the clock starts for 20 years. And then we would need to pay all the money back if we retired that building for 20 years. So that's an issue, realistically. Because I don't think we can realistically send back $5 to $6 million to the state and repay, would be approximately the amount. I like the idea of West Shore rec property, where that is, specifically because the other issue is that West Shore, we did finish our last construction site in 2016. So that would be 10 years and it'd be another 10 years. So I think we can utilize the building for at least another decade and we would not have to encounter the issue of where it is. And then we can also coincide with some other projects that we are working on to accommodate and it becomes an opportunity in the future. And it's also good swing space for the elementary school level. I think that East Shore should be rebuilt at East Shore, and JFK at JFK, and Live Oaks at Live Oaks. Keep those as is, instead of trying to mix properties at the same time.
So we do have some slides on safety and security. I don't know if you were addressing any of this, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, I think it's important to recognize we're at a high-level master planning
Yes, right.
phase at this part of the project, but I know it's come up, sorry, I keep going back too far, it's gonna take a while to get there. You know, a few things, we can send the link to this. We've actually written a white paper on designing for safe and healthy schools, which we can share, which talks about sort of research in terms of safety risk for students in schools. And I'll actually let Mike, if you want. Okay. So there's a lot in there. Like, safety is obviously a critical topic for all of us, and certainly top of mind for all of you and any parents. Every project would go through a very exhaustive design process. So right now you're seeing just boxes on a page. Safety is part of every single aspect of planning and design once you start actually thinking about what's going to happen on the site in terms of traffic flow, in terms of building orientation, in terms of visibility and transparency, in terms of how students are approaching, but also the other side around mental health support. So we're creating spaces that are suitable for students that where they can gain those support systems within the school. Thinking about what happens inside the building, like I shared previously. Obviously, we need to be mindful of, unfortunately, active shooter and all of that. But in schools, the reality is, on a daily basis, there's bullying, there's harassment that need to be thought about, which have long-term detrimental impact. So thinking about transparency and passive observation in buildings is also really critical. So going through a really sort of balanced, holistic approach for safety is critical. But that's going to be very site-specific, and obviously each design solution is going to be meeting the needs of that individual school community and that property. But typically there's something called CEPTA, which is crime prevention through environmental design, which is sort of best practice in terms of how architecture can support safety from a design standpoint. So I think a lot of goes into in terms of building organization, visibility, sort of securing the main entrance, site safety. We talked a lot about, to your point, pick up and drop off being a really critical point in traffic. So really going through that sort of CEPTA lens as folks are designing the buildings. So there's a lot to it, but it's really critical to acknowledge that at a level like this, we're not going to get in those weeds, but as projects start to become real things, we've got project teams, you've got construction contractors, you've got architects. It is part of each individual design process and really part of every phase from early conceptual planning all the way down to sort of final construction. But it's really critical taking a holistic approach to safety. I think a lot of times we just see in the news we got to harden our buildings, but it's really trying to think about doing that, but also in a way that is supportive for families. I always sort of think about the arrival experience is really critical for students. Oftentimes you're leaving a stressful environment for getting to school. The building should be welcoming, but also it should be secure and safe too. So finding that balance of sort of hardening the building, but also having it be welcoming, but also once you're in there, make sure there's sort of layered approaches to security. As I mentioned, a lot of thought goes into where adults are in the building, so you have sort of passive observation throughout the campus. This can be critical, but I'm not sure if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was also going to mention the construction period. You can be, you're looking at this daunting schedule of all these construction projects. So during a renovation or a new construction project, is also layering in the safety and security, especially with traffic on site. We're layering in contractors and deliveries. So working with a contractor, the CM, with you guys, with first responders, and make sure there's a safe and separate, clear delineation between construction site and school site and safety. That's the next, another level of security. That's really a temporary one during construction, but will be carefully looked at, at each of these individual projects. Each of these projects, the design period is about a year long from designing. So there's a lot of review process, a lot of kind of security meetings that happen behind the scenes, obviously for obvious reasons. But it's a very thorough and exhaustive design sequence.
I was at Pumpkin Delight on Friday for an event, and a couple of parents approached me who were at the elementary school public session that we had, and they told me that since, the drop-off has been totally redesigned, and that the flow is very good right now, that there are no problems. And I think, in going back and looking at some of the old enrollment projections, you know, all of our schools have had 350, 400 kids in them, and there were periods of time when there was a lot of busers. So if parents would utilize the bus, it makes things a whole lot more safe for, you know, have buses going in and out versus a lot of individual cars. And as we redistrict kids, I think, you know, there will be, it's obvious, there's gonna be, kids will be, who were walkers in some instances will be busers now. So in a lot of cases, I think that, you know, utilizing your bus system helps alleviate that issue. And of course, you can't force people to do that, but there's a lot you can do for education and outreach with the bus company and things like that. But at Pumpkin, the parents were very adamant that there is no traffic issue right now at Pumpkin.
Speaking of traffic, just from a sort of team standpoint, typically you would have a traffic consultant on an architectural team as you're going through the project, and they'll, you know, model simulations of what happens if the entry is here versus here, you know, where do buses come in. So it's a key part of the sort of our design team is having a consultant like that will study the exact, you know, dynamics of each individual location.
Was that the end of the?
Yeah, sorry,
No.
we obviously went through
Did go through pretty
120 slides.
Just be quiet for a minute.
Pass out here now.
I'm just thinking it might be beneficial if we're looking at some of these, if there's anything that stands out for anybody that we think we can eliminate at this point off the top.
Starting with 2 high schools.
Starting with high school?
Yeah, and I just don't think that is an economical or wise decision for the district. Especially since, I don't really think that's the right move.
Economical in terms of the cost of the capital construction or
Yeah,
the
over
delay
time, it
of?
pushes the delay out,
Yeah.
and, you know, obviously we can't control costs in the future, but the further you push it out, the more likelihood the cost of things are gonna go up, and then increases the cost overall for us.
You know, we're also talking a lot about other spaces within our high schools that we might need, and those are conversations to still be had. And I'm not sure that we'd be ready to start right away with saying these are the spaces that we need. And I think we talked last time about kind of interspersing those projects throughout the plan as they come up, and then at the end would be an overall, and we're not talking about building new for the high schools, we're talking about renovating, so it would be you know, finishing up the last things that needed to be done. So I would agree, I think, for me, I wouldn't want to be considering starting with high school. Ms. Doyle?
I agree. I think starting at high school would take us away from what we really need to focus on, in that we have immense needs at middle school and high school. Based on the information you have in the FCI plans here, there's just such a need at the elementary school level with Live Oaks, Cap Penn, even JFK, which is a little lower on the list. It's still, they're all significant, and none of these schools have air conditioning or anything else. And you know, we're talking about each of these renovations at a high school level, at a renovate is new, if we were to do so, is approximately $330 million, or was at the end of the plan, so now we're talking about
Yeah.
$150 million.
190 or so.
190.
As a renovate is new.
As a renovate to new, so we're talking $380 million, which is the cost of 3 to 4 elementary schools.
For the whole thing.
Yeah, for the whole thing. And so, I mean, we are currently making investments at our high school level. I mean, in the next couple of weeks, while we're gonna start the tech ed wing, we are gonna look at Joseph F. Foreign Pool, what's going on there. There are other things, I think, it diverts from the other needs of the district, and we're just putting it out, and I realistically can't make a recommendation that we spend $199 million on a high school and then turn around and ask for more money. I mean, I think we have to, and we've done enough renovation, I think, for right now.
Am I also correct that in the presentations tonight, the order of the the last 4 schools doesn't really matter. I mean, that can shift around.
Yeah, that can certainly shift. Yeah. You're talking about the elementary schools?
Yes, did I say, yes,
Elementary.
that is what I
Last
meant,
4.
elementary
Elementary and
schools.
middle school probably could be more flexible if you started with 2 elementary. You need to start with 1.
I will say, if you go with the first scenario, it's critical you start with JFK
Correct,
and
right.
and Live Oaks, because you need to be able to, you know, if the overarching sentiment is we want to build something before we're closing schools, you need to free up swing space, so by doing that, you could, you know, potentially close Meadowside and Cap Penn. Again, not every student at Cap Penn would have the new building experience, but some likely would through the boundary process, and that would free up swing space.
Can we all agree that we want to minimize the use of portables as much as possible?
Yes,
Is that-
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and then just to go back to the high school piece, because I think it would be helpful if we could eliminate at least one of these to start with. So is there anybody that feels we should be starting with high school? So I'm not seeing anybody, so can we eliminate that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll eliminate the high school piece, okay? Eliminate the high school.
Okay, down 4. Or 4 plus 4A, 3C.
And we are in agreement that we want to try to minimize the use of portables
Yes.
as much as possible, although it might not be 100% possible. My recollection was with initially we were talking about using the elementary spaces as as swing space, which would have required, which might, under some
Definitely.
of these scenarios, would still be needed.
Yeah, to accommodate the middle schools, I would advocate you put some portables, for the additional capacity, but then, you know, again, we talked about that 2 years in construction is 2/3 of middle school experience, so making sure there's enough spaces there to still feel like a middle school, so maybe you need to make some science lab modifications. Again, those investments would sort of live for the rest of the swing space period,
Right.
but you still would require a little bit of portable work, and maybe a little bit of building
Was it,
modification.
can somebody remind me how, I don't know if administration remembers, so using the elementary schools, under the scenario that used the 2 elementary schools as swing space for the middle schools, how many portables were we talking about with that?
I don't know that we estimated the number, but we do have, for 2 years, 6 portable classrooms is $1 million.
No, you had shared that, I'm just thinking in terms of
It'd be about
numbers.
5 or 6 would be the,
For each school?
yeah, likely.
And that would be just to give them specialized spaces.
And the enrollment's a little bit larger
Yeah, I
than,
gotcha.
Right,
yeah,
'cause
so
we're
it's,
talking 600 kids
Right.
versus 400.
they would be,
capacity.
it's just the current middle school size, because Harborside, in this scenario,
Oh,
Harborside
okay,
would
you're
remain
right,
open,
yeah.
so it's
Okay,
the
I'm sorry.
450
Yeah.
students. But again, it's, middle schools do require a little bit more in terms of
Right, okay.
spaces than a traditional elementary school.
And I'm hearing people are intrigued by that last option as well.
I think the new site is intriguing. I am not a fan of placing East Shore on the Live Oak side.
I agree with you
Yeah,
there.
I
I
don't,
agree also.
Yeah, I agree with
yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. But the new site, I did have a question about that, because I noticed you gave the address as Benham Avenue, that
It is that's the Simon Lake property.
it's not, so the Simon Lake would come down.
Uh-huh.
I was just making sure,
Yeah.
because that, like, the front of the school wouldn't be like at Benham Ave, would it?
You would have the whole parcel
Okay,
to
just making- I was
design,
just
so you
wondering,
could,
okay.
yeah, you could design, I mean, entrance could be really anywhere, obviously.
Okay.
So can we kind of talk through that scenario a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess we talked about a few different things there. One concern that the schedules may not be entirely aligned. So assuming they are aligned, you could build a new West Shore on that property, you know, for the 2 years of construction or sort of overall 5-year sort of period, you would have a new middle school on the new property. That would then free up the existing West Shore building to be swing space. So you could, the way we structured it was JFK would then swing down to the West Shore building, utilize that for swing space.
JFK doesn't need to have a swing space.
It
because-
doesn't need to, but I would always say if you could give a team
Okay.
a blank site, you'd rather that than try to fit it on remaining portion, like if you have swing space, I would use it. I know it's an inconvenience for families for swing space, but again, with my sort of 50-year lens, as a design team, I would always want the options for a full site rather than say you have to put it on this portion of the property. You can, and you can get a great building that way. But you may be missing an opportunity by not utilizing existing JFK. So JFK certainly works if you want to build on-site with the active school, but if you have the swing space availability, I would always advocate for getting students into a swing space, giving yourself sort of full reign of that property. But again, if you want to limit the movement of families and swing space and all of that, you could keep them there. But I would advocate for utilizing swing space so you have full access to that property and design it in a way that makes sense for a 50-year building. And it may end up in the same spot, we don't know, but just sort of having that option to put it anywhere on the JFK property would make sense to me.
Okay, so in terms of thinking in terms of the middle school piece, so a new West Shore is built, which allows us, and I'm gonna look at over administration for this too, because you're in the middle of it. A new West Shore is built, which would accommodate all of the West Shore students and about half of the Harborside kids. That would be, ultimately, that's what we would be accommodating. So that opens up half of Harborside to potentially accommodate East Shore while East Shore is being rebuilt.
You would have to stagger them, right? You
It's
couldn't
all
do them.
Harborside. Why only half Harborside?
Because
The new West Shore's open.
the new West Shore is open,
Oh, so
so-
the whole building is there, not,
but half of the students
Half-
would go,
okay,
half the
sorry.
kids, I'm sorry. Half the kids would go to, so the kids that are gonna be going to West Shore would go to their new building
yes.
with the West Shore kids. So then, now that leaves Harborside half empty. Half the students that would be at East Shore will still be at Harborside, and East Shore can swing into Harborside
Yes.
while the East Shore building is being built. And then potentially needing some portables to accommodate that number of kids, but maybe not, we'd have to see.
Harborside needing.
Harborside needing some portables. And then East Shore is completed, and then middle school's done at that point.
Correct.
And then you go back to the original, build a new JFK on JFK, build a new Live Oaks on Live Oaks.
Yep.
And that could be, you could start either way. I mean, you could do that you could do the elementary first, or you could do the middle school first and then you do the other half. And then you go with the rest of the plan. To me, sounds really clean to me. and doable.
Just to make sure, because it's a little bit different than we present, I just want to make sure everyone understands that, make sure I followed it. The way you outlined it would require sort of staggered middle school construction. So you would do West Shore
Maybe
first.
An elementary
Yep.
school, is that what you meant to?
No, he's correct, that
Okay. Yeah.
you couldn't do both middle schools at the same time.
Yeah, so you would do West Shore, they would move into their new building. You would officially close Harborside. Those Harborside students, half of them would go to West Shore. Half would become East Shore students. They would remain in their building, but they would essentially become the East Shore program. East Shore would fully fit into Harborside for swing space. You would then build East Shore for their 2-year construction period. So it's a little bit different than we presented concurrently, but I just want to make sure it's clear that it's staggered in the
It
sense
is
you can do
some-
one
yes.
and then
You could not do
one,
both
and then you can
together.
move to the elementary schools after that.
We just need to consider what we're doing with West Shore at that point.
The current
The
West Shore
building.
building?
It could be
It could-
swing space, it could be.
It could be
some
anything.
option
It
for
could go
swing
back to the city, it could be swing space, it could be, we could say we want to use it. I mean, it would free up that West Shore building.
But it's also contingent on acquiring that piece of land.
That is correct, yeah, we
Yeah.
have to, yeah, that's obvious. I mean, we're talking generically here,
Yeah.
and yes, we haven't even approached the city about it yet, so.
So Harborside is, I'm trying to come up with the adjective. It's the least physical space appropriate environment for middle schoolers.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep, yes,
Um,
we've talked about that. It doesn't have,
And,
it doesn't
and
have
now
the
we're
space we'd like
moving,
to have.
now we're moving East Shore kids into that building, and if West Shore's sitting empty, I'd rather use West Shore because it's much more physically
Mhm.
conducive for learning than Harborside is,
And I-
so.
Yep.
albeit it's a drive,
Taking a bus ride for a
the
physical
2
space.
years in that physical space is gonna be a better learning environment at West Shore than it is Harborside.
And that was my original thought, was that.
So, that would be, of course, we'd need time to talk as a team, but I would prefer kids being in the West Shore building
Mhm.
as opposed to the Harborside building.
To limit having super long bus rides, would we need a lot more buses?
That would be the prerogative of the board, if you wanted to. Of course, running 20 buses instead of 10 will shorten bus runs, but we'd have to do some projections on that.
Do you think buses would be cheaper than trailers?
I don't know yet.
I don't know. I just worry that the community is they're gonna feel it's far.
I agree with that.
And it's,
I agree.
it's something that, I mean, but it's something that could be discussed further at that point. I mean, we have two different options we could go with.
You could stick with the original, and they can go to like one of the elementary schools that we have, use the swing space, and then you'd have to put the trailers out, or they'd have to commute.
We don't have an elementary school that could fit 450 middle schoolers well. And I understand the whole notion of modular spaces, but in 2026, modular spaces are actually quite nice. So the space itself may be physically appealing. I understand that there's a mindset of a modular space, I get that, but they're nice spaces, right?
Oh, yeah, we've done a lot, and actually, parents and teachers actually like them better than their previous classrooms oftentimes. You get controllable HVAC in there, you get, they're quite nice. I mean, they come in a million different ranges, right? If you
Yeah.
get the sort of low end, it could be not nice, but there's a good middle
Yep.
range. I just mapped it, I mean, obviously, it's not during rush hour. It's about a 16-minute drive from right now, according to Google, from East Shore to West Shore. Obviously, that increases in the morning and the afternoons, but.
And then you add stop every,
Stopping.
Yeah, bus stops, yeah.
But it could still be in the window of the 30 minutes that we have, the 40 minutes actually we have allocated.
we would still establish a goal of getting all of our students from time of pickup to school in the time allotments that we have now. We're not putting kids on a bus for an hour.
Thinking about it, my son actually, for programming, went from my house, and I live right by 7 Lake, I could walk to it in 30 seconds. He went to Live Oaks. He took a bus as a 3-year-old. So I suppose if my 3-year-old could do it, older kids can do it. And he did that for 3 years. He took a bus from my house on Naugatuck all the way to Live Oaks. Live Oaks is as far as you can get from school in Norfolk. So if he could do it, I suppose the middle schoolers could do it.
I mean, I do think these are better obviously they're middle schools. They're better middle school swing spaces than putting them in elementary spaces.
And that's, what I heard loud and clear last week was that the main concern was the swing space issue and putting, for an example, a Cap Penn student that has gone through Cap Penn and then they go 1 year to their East Shore as their middle school and then they're swinging back into an elementary school. I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern and I do like better the idea of having middle school swing space for middle school kids.
And a little bit longer timing on either end of those routes. If you think of like that 7-hour day, the students are gonna actually be in that actual environment versus a little bit extra of travel time on the front side or the back side. But then don't discount that 7 hours in that actual space. So I think that little
Better
bit of extra
space.
time,
Better
that better
space.
space.
It is, and West Shores has some remodeled rooms that are really quite nice. So reflected, and it might be better if they went to another middle school space.
So JFK was doing the harbor side in this case? So JFK and East Shore could get hit at the same time?
Or you could start JFK on on the JFK property.
Oh, yeah, I thought we were just trying to hit a blank parcel.
Yeah, if you do have a blank parcel, then certainly you'd have the option to build on-site or to swing them here.
Can you speak to why we're starting with JFK? I understand JFK and Live Oaks have space to construct on the property, right? So I understand that. But looking again at the FCI list, there are five other elementary schools that are above it. I recognize that Meadowside and Captown are on the list of closures potentially, but I'm just wondering why, especially if we're gonna swing it, why we would start with that, and why is it above Live Oaks generally anyway? Why wouldn't we put Live Oaks first?
Yeah, I think the sort of east-west, you could flip-flop either of those. In terms of the JFK, I mean, if you're not gonna build on-site and you're gonna use swing space, it could go later in the plan. You could start if Pumpkin, I don't have the FCIs in front of me, but if Pumpkin's worse, for example, you could start with Pumpkin and sort of have those be interchangeable. They were originally first because they had sort of the ability to build on land, and it sort of opens up other opportunity. But if they are to swing off-site, or if you do want to start with the middle schools and other options, you could flip-flop some of them.
Well, yeah,
I would also say.
Initially, it was Live Oaks and
JFK.
JFK together at the
Together.
same time.
Well, in one of the scenarios from the last meeting, right, the two scenarios were 2 at once or 1 at once.
Yeah.
Right,
Oh,
the
okay.
one with 1 at once starts with JFK.
It
So
could
I
be
was just
either way.
curious why we would do that over Live Oaks.
It could be either, it could flip-flop. There's really not. The other thing I would note, I just want to acknowledge is FCI is one measure. They're all in bad condition. Like I wouldn't say like you're gonna see a dramatic major difference from a 0.45 to a 0.49. I don't know, I don't know what the numbers are off. And I know
There's a
one
marginal
of,
difference between
yeah.
15.8 and 45.
But if you are not going to need to build JFK on the property, it does definitely open up opportunities for them to maybe get later in the plan. And we could use FCI as the determinant in terms of who goes.
Yeah, Live Oaks is 74.3 and
Yeah.
JFK is 45.
Yeah, I mean, 70 is certainly quite high, so it definitely could go first.
Could we walk through doing what we're thinking with the one middle school, building on Simon Lake lot, but also doing an elementary at the same time? Could we, so basically doing Live Oaks at the same time, and what that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, Live Oaks, again, you would be able to, if they're concurrent, you would build Live Oaks on the property at Live Oaks. So you would build a new Live Oaks for Live Oaks on their property while the middle school is being built at the new
But I
property.
think that's where we run into the kids end up getting shuffled.
Well, not, they wouldn't. I mean, it makes sense because Live Oaks has no effect on anything else, so it's.
But I'm talking about the calf pen, so then Live Oaks would finish. Can you walk through the next? Live Oaks would
Well, they've
finish.
been getting a middle school experience though this time. Where
Right.
I think the original plan, or they were going to like an elementary building and we were giving them the trailers, so to speak. But this time.
They'd
they
go
would
to to a middle.
Yeah.
So they'd be going to a real middle
A real
school
middle
that has
school, so
actually
that-
had some additions to it. And
Yeah.
has, you know, it's
Yeah.
a nice building. I mean, a reasonably nice building, there's parts of it are nice. But they would be having the middle school experience, so they wouldn't be missing, no kid now would be missing out
Yeah,
on that middle school experience if they went to West Shore as their swing space.
yes, true.
While their building was being built.
Okay.
So that kind of solved that problem.
It does.
Yeah.
Which was the big argument from last week, which is understandable.
Yeah.
That their kids would be in these like elementary spaces.
If you could financially afford the middle school and elementary school at the same time, there's no reason you couldn't do Live Oaks at the same time as the
West
middle
Shore,
school.
yeah.
Assuming you're okay building the Live Oaks building on the same property.
Okay.
But there's also nothing preventing us from going middle school, elementary school, middle school, elementary school,
Yeah.
with a little bit of a lag between
Separately?
each of the schools separately.
Staggering them.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, in conjunction, we're also doing work at the high schools. So, I mean, that also has to
Be added.
be considered.
This, with the staggering add cost to the project overall?
Well, yeah, anytime you're pushing a project out, you're basically taking the cost of that and multiply that by 3.5% every single year. So anytime you're sort of delaying, not delaying, but pushing a project out, the cost of that project will go up. And over time, it does add up pretty significantly.
So if we could do 2 schools at once, it would be far more cost effective.
For the overall program, you would be saving, you would need to have larger sort of upfront amount of money to do 2 schools, but long-term, you'd be saving a significant amount of money by doing as much early as possible.
When you looked at the Simon Lake site, did you do you didn't do one of those drawings
No.
with the current school?
No. We know, like, the nice thing is it's a nice, flat, open
Well, my
site.
thinking was because it's, the police, could Simon Lake stay on while the schools stay, while the new middle school was
I'm sure it could
being
technically
built?
fit. I don't know that's the right
Yeah.
long
Yeah,
term, because I think you're gonna
the
sacrifice.
building should sit that close to, I live over there, I don't think the building should sit close to Benham. I think it should sit out where Simon Lake is.
Okay.
And the field stays where it is. That's just from living over there. Benham Avenue is a one-way street and it's incredibly busy, filled with cars and stuff.
Yeah. And I think by keeping the existing building, you would sacrifice ideal outdoor space you may want.
Yeah.
Middle school, you basically full building on the property. I have no doubt it could fit, but is it the right long-term solution?
Ms. Glennon?
Yes.
Sorry,
Dr. Vitale?
I was just gonna say, can we just, for a brief minute, discuss what would be needed to figure out, is that property within our school district properties? No, so it's a city property currently.
It was turned over to the city.
Hmm.
Dr. Vitale, you were going to say something?
Only if Ms.
Oh, are you done?
I'm just sitting here thinking, I understand the route of starting with middle first. I understand all those reasons, but just from our experiences, I qualitatively feel like the elementaries are in greater need. You have West Shore that is in semi-good shape, and East Shore it's semi-good shape now, right? Harborside, I can't say the same. But most of our elementary schools are just not in good shape. I'm thinking Live Oaks. I don't think Live Oaks can wait 6 years. I would agree, Ms. Emmons, that Live Oaks is, even in the FCI and our experience operationally, programmatically, it has half of a classroom of a library. They may be adding a section next year. We're not sure where that's going to go. Like, Live Oaks is really critical condition to either, something has to happen there. So I'm thinking programmatically, if a lot of other factors could fall into place, I prefer to start with elementary, or start with an elementary also.
Yeah, it seems to me, just in thinking this through, that this idea of potentially using the Simon Lake property, but doing it second, just kind of replacing it with what your original plan had for the second piece. And everything else kind of falls out the same way. I understand what you're saying about the elementary piece, and I also think, I think what we're talking about right now solves the problem of this swing space for the middle school time. So I'm more comfortable doing the elementary piece first, because that problem
Yep.
has been solved. And the elementary piece does also bring us the most efficiency in terms of economy of scale and things like that. So that's kind of where, as I thought this through initially without this other piece, my thinking was, if we can solve the swing space problem for the middle school, then I still think we should be starting with elementary.
just to make sure I'm clear, so start with the two elementary
This is just
schools.
thinking out loud.
Yeah, no. So there's a lot to process. So start with in this current scenario, Live Oaks and JFK. Then you move to the middle schools where the West Shore would then go to the new property. East Shore would likely go to, it sounds like either Harborside or West Shore for swing space.
And it would mean doing those separately. They'd have to be staggered.
Yeah, correct.
So there might be another middle school, elementary school piece in there.
Right,
Yeah.
I like that idea. I agree with Dr. Chai that it's like a triage. And I think the elementary school, all of them are in the most needs. And it makes sense just to start with JFK, definitely Live Oaks. And then move to that middle school piece and maybe another elementary school before they begin East Shore.
It works.
In terms of, and Dr. Buttai, you had given us a list of order in terms of programmatic needs and stuff like that. And I think we had Orchard Hills on there.
It was Live Oaks, Calf Pen, Pumpkin, Orchard Hills.
No, it was Orchard Hills third.
No.
On the list she gave us the other day, it was, yes.
Oh, I
I have it right here.
right.
I have it right here. Live Oaks, JFK, Orchard Hills. Orchard Hills.
I typed wrong, even though I copied and pasted.
Can you say that one more time? Live Oak.
Live Oaks, Calf Pen, Orchard Hills, Meadowside.
No,
Are you okay?
Live Oaks, JFK, Orchard Hills.
Oh, I'm looking at MCI,
You're looking
that's
at a
fine.
different list.
So for example, you're saying like while West Shore is being done, Orchard Hills could be done.
Maybe.
As
Or
a
the nice thing about
Or
that,
staggered.
the nice thing about that is you would then have the two sort of fully built schools on the east side in Calf Pen would, all of those students in theory would be zoned to, most of them would be zoned to two new buildings. It would push their closure out a little bit. But they would be then going to Orchard Hills and Live Oaks, most of the students, in new buildings to accommodate the increased enrollment.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah,
What-
so if you
how would
go,
it work?
so if you start JFK and Live Oaks, right, those are the first two, you've got new buildings, east-west. The way I heard it was, the second phase would be West Shore at the new property, and then you add an elementary school as the second project there, so then you would do Orchard Hills as part of that sort of second phase of projects. So after that second phase, you've got Live Oaks, Orchard Hills, new West Shore, and JFK. So on the east side, you would have a new Orchard Hills and new Live Oaks, and then Calf Pen would consolidate into the new, they would be basically moving into new facilities to accommodate the enrollment. Does that make sense?
Then it would go on to East Shore and another elementary school.
Yeah. And that could be somewhere in the center, it could be Pumpkin, it could be,
Maybe I'm misremembering this and I can look at it. In the other plan, I thought Calf Pen was closing when Live Oaks was done.
it could, if you want, I was saying, if you want to wait until both buildings are done, this would accelerate that, or you could close Calf Pen and some of the students would go to Orchard Hills. They'd be moving, in this scenario, into a construction or swing space site. Or you could, if you're okay delaying the closure of Calf Pen a year or two, those students, and we can map out both so you can see it visually, but scenario one is close Calf Pen before Orchard Hills is done, so you're closing them early. Not every student would go to a new building, or you wait to close Calf Pen a little bit, and most of those students would go to new buildings at Orchard Hills and Live Oaks.
And where's the swing space for Orchard Hills?
Meadowside,
Uh,
potentially.
Meadows?
It's the old Live Oaks, right?
No.
No.
No, it would likely, and I didn't map it out, I guess you might have to close Calf Pen, yeah, the more we thought.
Well,
No, you-
Meadowside would be,
You keep.
because Meadowside's gonna swing to the, Meadowside's gonna swing to the west. So once JFK is done, there could be a swing of Meadowside to Pumpkin and JFK, those.
Right, but if you were gonna do Orchard Hills, they would have to go to do Orchard Hills,
Yeah,
they would have to go to Calf Pen
Pen.
and Live
Yeah,
Oaks.
you're right. Yeah, so you would have to close Calf Pen, I'm sorry.
Well, we
'Cause-
redistricted at that time.
Or they could go to Harborside, Because if East Shore is going to West Shore, Harborside's open, so Orchard Hills could go to Harborside for swing space.
What would need to be done to Harborside to make it appropriate for CAF Penn kids to go there?
Little people,
Bathrooms.
toiletries, toilets, little people toilets primarily. And you'd have to make sure that, and we could put all K-1 on the first floor.
And specials?
I think you can send a K-1 to special on the second floor as long as it's a certain amount of time.
I think you'd have a lot of room flexibility. Cap Penn, if I remember, is only around 219 or so students.
279 or something.
Is it 279? Okay, I thought it was a little lower.
But I think there'd be options for swing space at that point.
272.
I think Meadowside, we haven't talked about Meadowside, but once JFK is done,
Yep.
then we would have to look at when we can retire Meadowside. So Meadowside would become swing space, potentially too.
You would need a playscape also, some sort.
Yeah, 100%.
Can you move playscapes from one building to another? Does that work?
You can, but you have to have it done by the professional company for liability's sake. So that is a little bit of money.
Probably cheaper than trailers though.
Yeah.
And outfitting elementary schools to fit middle schoolers. So,
Probably want to do some additional fencing because little people run around. Yeah, we'd have to give that a little bit of thought, but there'd be some money that you'd put into Harborside for that.
Which you did put some placeholder money into the quote budget. So-
Yeah, we had, it was roughly $4 million for each swing space. Would it be worthwhile, I'm not saying we need to do this now, but us recommend, so this is obviously contingent on the new property, right? Is there a fallback option that's worth including in case that property does not come through?
Yeah, that was gonna be my next
Oh, sorry.
question. Yeah, no, but that was the other piece that we really need to discuss then. And I think, so was there an option where, which I thought was in one of the plans that a member of the public had suggested, where the element, and it may be one of these and I'm just not quite recognizing it, but the middle schools kind of just swing east and west and act as their own swing space, knowing that we'd have to probably use some portables. So if you're gonna renovate West Shore first, just as an example, West Shore students would move into Harborside. Some of the Harborside students would move into East Shore, because I think we know East Shore does have a little bit of space in it. You renovate West Shore, and then everything swings to the west, and it would have to be similar to what we were talking about with the new space, that West Shore is now a larger capacity. The Harborside kids that are gonna go there will permanently go there, and then East Shore goes into the Harborside space with remaining Harborside kids while East Shore is being renovated. So,
Can you repeat the first step in that one more time?
so the first step would be, West Shore would be renovated first,
Yep.
and the West Shore kids would swing into
Harborside.
Harborside, and some of Harborside would swing into East Shore. So you're dividing the middle school population amongst those two buildings, understanding that you might need some portables to do that.
Yeah.
And then you renovate West Shore. And then, once that's done, it's gonna be the larger capacity, so you then swing,
You move West Shore.
West Shore kids go back, half of the Harborside kids go to West Shore, those are the kids that are gonna go there anyway. And then you swing East Shore into the Harborside building with the half of the population, and then you renovate East Shore.
Yeah.
And then everybody goes to their, East Shore all goes to their respective school when it's done, and then Harborside is empty.
That's the alternate if we can't have the new site.
Yeah, so basically you would close Harborside before construction, allocate them east and west.
See, I don't see it that way. I just see it that you're not closing it, you're just emptying it out. It's gonna be used.
You're allocating
You're
the
closing
students to
you're
their
closing the
perspective.
program,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
Yeah, then you would
East Shore or West Shore.
rezone, they would become East Shore or West Shore students. I would advocate not having a group of Harborside students in a different, like they just become
Right.
East Shore,
Right.
West Side, West
Yeah.
Shore students. Yeah, so that is possible to require at a minimum 6 portables at Harborside to.
Well, can I also ask a question about, so Harborside is, if we're then using Harborside as swing space, when would be the last year? So it seems to me we'd be needing to do some upgrades to the building itself.
To Harborside?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, you would definitely need the portables, and I would probably say you need to do some improvements. I mean, the thing that you would use it for both the middle schools, right? So it would be open for at least 9 years. After that, those students would then go to their middle schools. You could then move to JFK and Live Oak and JFK after that. Then you sort of go down the path of maybe closing Meadowside and Calf Pen, use those as swing space. So at that point, after the 2 middle schools in this scenario, either that becomes empty or you use that for swing space for the 2 sort of north-central schools down the line. I would say yes, if you're gonna keep the building operating for 15 years, you probably wanna invest in something just to keep it
necessarily be that long.
operationally.
But it also, I think that middle school piece sits independently of the rest of it. So we could still do elementary first, the 2,
Yes.
and then do the middle school piece, using middle school as swing space. And I get the point of the systems within the building. That, every year they're getting older, and we might need to make some adjustments there. But and I totally understand that in certain cases, the instructional spaces in Harborside are deficient to West Shore and elementary. But we've been dealing with it for how long now, and you're just delaying, you're just extending a little bit the amount of time that we would be using that space, and doing the best we can with it, which is what we're doing right now. With the kids there.
Only if we can't use the new site.
Correct, yeah.
Well, so just to go, sorry that this may be not a good question, but any improvements we do to a school that we intend to eventually close, we will not get reimbursement, correct?
If we turn it back to the city, but there doesn't mean that couldn't be Harborside could be something else in the future that is not
Education.
for educational purposes, whether turning into administrative buildings, a preschool, or other things like that.
So to directly answer your question, we would apply for reimbursement, likely get it, but at the time where it no longer functions as a school building, we'd have to report that to the state, and whatever is left on, depending on the number of years between the time of getting reimbursed and the time that it would expire, you owe then the state back that amount of money.
So it's only a percentage, it's
Yeah.
the state's percent of what they've given us. So we're not talking tens of millions of dollars in this case, like we would be doing for Pumpkin. We're talking a small amount in terms of.
Is there any idea, just broadly, of how much that would be for Harborside? Based on what needs exist there? I'm just curious, I feel like it's good to just have the big picture, not that I'm against
Yeah,
using
I
it,
mean,
but.
it depends if, whatever, I mean, there's so many options, but it depends what kind of project it actually is, because some projects wouldn't even be eligible for reimbursement, so depending upon what kind of upgrade.
Can you give an
we're
example of
doing.
what's not reimbursable?
One that's really clear is like athletic fields, or things that relate to like athletic fields are not gonna be reimbursable.
Roofs are,
Roofs are.
HVAC is.
HVAC is.
Any type of academic, like if you were to upgrade the tech ed space, that's
Yeah.
reimbursable.
Asbestos, any kind of.
So it's really the tech
like
ed
that.
space that we're talking about at Harborside, correct?
Yeah.
If we were going down the program route, it would be the tech ed space and maybe some of the science labs, but knowing that it's not gonna be in existence, we'd hold off on that.
And
And
those are
then-
lengthy processes just based on state guidelines.
By the time you get that
By
done,
the time you get that done.
you're
I don't
halfway
know.
through waiting to close it.
So what's happening now in Harborside, not having those spaces? They're just don't have those
The
spaces.
space is there, it's
Space
just
is
not
there.
what
It's just
what
not
we'd like it to be.
appropriate.
It's just,
Okay.
the space is there, it's just not up to
There are some
Not optimal.
curriculum adjustments made, so it doesn't give students there the equitable
As the other
experience. Yeah. Well, we could say that about, you know, the chorus room at law compared to foreign, right? Like, we know that, we've seen that. It's just the question here is, to what extent do you invest in a building that you don't plan to use for 20 years, but you're faced to use it for 10 years? So now that becomes an awkward decision, because you do have 10 years of students going through that school, right?
So you had put 4 million, am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah.
In Meadowside and Calf Pen, as we use them as swing space?
Yeah.
So that's 8 million total for swing spaces, hypothetically.
Was it 4 million for each or
4 million for each, yeah, and it's a placeholder.
Yeah,
mean,
I
there's
thought
not-
it was just 4 million flat.
Yeah, not 4 for each.
So with that 8 million, would that cover, I feel like it's hard because we're not really looking at anything. Would that cover what we might need to do at Harborside, Calf Pen, and Meadowside as we use all 3 of them as swing spaces throughout this process?
We can do a deeper dive into the very specific facility needs at Harborside. For example, if the roof is needing a replacement, that's $1 to $2 million right there. So we can go through the facility condition, like get the very specific reports and make a recommendation on, hey, you could probably hold off on doing this, or this is something we probably need to plan for, and try to get a little more specific if that'd be helpful. I don't have that in my head,
Yeah.
but happy to dig deeper.
I mean, Nicole.
Quick question, how quick could we find out if the Simon Lake property would be available in the future?
We'd have to have a conversation with the mayor.
We would direct
Upon
administration to
your
go.
direction, we would start that process.
Thank you.
As well.
I was gonna say, any plan that we adopt will have extensive planning at every single level. And I think how I see this is an aspirational plan that if the conditions exactly the same, 5 years, 4 years, however many years out from here exist, that's how we would choose to go from here, from these schools. So in that sense, I mean, some of these questions about how much money we need to be invested would be an on-the-ground decision at that time for the planning of the future. I mean, if we made recommendation to renovate, to do work at Harborside, realistically, that work is not even going to start for 3 years from now. Because looking at the plan here, what is provided of the timeline, just from our experience that I've seen is that we get, CIP goes to the mayor in May, so we're in May 2026 right now. April 2027 is when it comes to facilities planning, if it goes through. By the time we pick an architect is chosen, the plans are developed and things like that in the state, it's 2 years from that date. So we're talking 3 years from there. And then we got another, at least a summer. So we're talking, if we make investments at that level to some extent at some of these middle schools, we won't even be able to touch, like, it's hard to know where these what's going on here. So it's a little bit of, I feel like that's a little bit of cart before the horse. If we can't even like start the ball rolling, we almost have to see what happens and work with our partners in the city of what's really gonna come to us and where we can go from there. So I will say I'm a fan of I'm very heavily leaning towards elementary schools first, middle school, West Shore Rec, Orchard Hills, East Shore, and then continue the process from there.
Ms. Edmonds, I'm in the Bureau Veritas report for Harborside. So it does give you a little bit of an idea of some of the priorities and then some of the nice to dos. So maybe a more specific answer would be in that report. So there's some things like suspended ceilings need to be replaced because they're in poor condition, ADA restrooms, appropriate parking, kitchen and laundry areas. It goes into the science rooms, it goes into the tech ed space. Something like a conference room, we wouldn't prioritize that. But there are some details in the Harborside report that would inform how we would prioritize the amount of money we'd have to spend there.
Okay.
And that is December 2024 is the
Great.
date of that report.
To the point you were just making, the 20-year timeline building out from Pumpkin, completion of the gym project would be 2044?
2046.
46. Oh, okay. So in scenario 2, which is one school at a time from the last meeting, we wouldn't have even started construction at our last school. So just putting it out there again. Especially with what you just said about like how long it takes to really truly do these things, and if we're doing high school projects simultaneously and asking the city for more at a time versus just straight up 2 elementary schools to, you know, I think it's worth just thinking through that again. Like what are, if we have an additional school property available to us, or an additional property, what are the ideal properties, looking at the whole and not just state reimbursement, because we could be looking 20 years down the line.
So your thinking on that is to put Pumpkin Delight where, Simon, in this piece of property that we're talking about?
Or if West Shore is moving to that new property, gently moving Pumpkin to West
To
Shore.
what end?
Because the parking.
Because of the traffic flow.
Which may or may not really be an issue according to, you know, what we know today. I mean,
Well, maybe, Dr. Patai, could your team, or Mr. Browning, could your team speak a little bit to that? Because maybe, I mean, we have received a couple of emails about traffic flow, and I'm just curious from your perspective if that's an issue.
When we first opened up the addition to Pumpkin, we had some traffic challenges. So that is true. And then during construction, without, I think, anyone surprised, that was an issue. Because sometimes you start the school year off with one pattern of traffic and then you have to change it because now we've relocated the crew, right, to work on different part of the building. But that became resolved because Mr. McNeil, the principal there, revisited that with Jeff Nielsen, our Director of Safety and Security, and Pat Bradbury. And they made some changes. And we have heard since then it's much better. But I'll also give you an example of a school that is not new and did not get a renovation. That's Orchard Hills. And that we've experienced for a very long time, traffic jams. And it is true what Ms. Glennon said. It's not necessarily a traffic jam because of buses, but because of the number of cars. And in my tenure here in 8 years, we've actually had to redo, by physically investing in repaving, taking out curbs. We actually took out a play set over at Live Oaks. We had to redo traffic patterns at Live Oaks and Orchard Hills because of the old layout nature of those schools. They weren't built for the number of cars that the two schools were experiencing. But the the bus loops were more appropriately handling the buses, but where parents were dropping off, it was just super jammed. So I think it is just the natural part of running a school that you have to revisit the traffic pattern. And hence, we have done that at Live Oaks, and we put through some money into that, as approved by this board. Maybe 3 years ago, we redid the traffic pattern at Orchard Hills, because this board approved some money. And more recently at Pumpkin, after the addition was completed, we had some lessons learned very quickly, and the administration there, along with some members of our team, revisited it, and from what I understand, it's much, much smoother now. And so I don't think it's a manifestation of it being a dead end. That's not a cause. Because Live Oaks is not a dead end and Orchard Hills is not a dead end. Now, Orchard Hills is awkward, right? It's limited acreage, it's right there in a neighborhood, it has that curve. It doesn't have a lot of land for lots of cars to line up and wait on kids to be released. So they've had to create a system even after we expanded the drop-off. So I think it is more of a manifestation that our schools were built in the 50s and 60s at a time when more people used buses, and we didn't count on having as many cars dropping off kids.
Do you envision that being an issue if we're using Harborside as swing space for elementary? If there are potentially more parents driving their kids than we currently have Harborside parents driving their kids?
Harborside has separated their parent drop-off.
They're two different areas.
Yeah, they separated them, so there's a front loop for parents and then a front loop for buses. And
So
they're
there'd
two
be
different.
no traffic issues with having elementary kiddos?
I won't go on record saying
Oh,
overrun.
yeah, sure. Sure.
I mean, it gets, I mean, I drive my kids to school, so like, it does get jammed up even now a little bit, but if people get out of the car quickly, it's not that bad. It could be worse. I've seen worse.
We get jammed up because Harborside parents come here to avoid the drop-off. So now we have traffic issues here, and we don't have walking guards here. So I imagine that behavior will exist even with elementary parents, and at that point, that would probably be more of a dangerous situation, because we have 5-year-olds doing that and not 12-year-olds.
I would think too that right now you have walkers. We have walkers at Harborside, but if we're swinging, for example, Mathewson with the scenario one over here, Mathewson is swinging to Harborside, there wouldn't be any walkers in that scenario.
Correct.
So everyone would be either bused or driven, which would maybe change things a bit.
Yeah, and I think the safest thing to do is put your child on a bus. We offer that, and it probably will get them here in about the same amount of time. So I'm worried that because parents would feel uncomfortable putting their kids on a bus from Mathewson to Harborside, that there might be more drivers if it becomes an elementary swing space. So I think we have a really great team. Mr. Nielsen would go out with Mr. Bradbury, work with the administration. We'd analyze traffic flow. We'd bring in a police officer that works in traffic. So we'd have to manage it through processes.
My experience has been, first few weeks, you do see an uptick in drivers. After that, people start to get a little more comfortable with buses, or maybe they're a little bit more resistant to sort of sit in traffic and rely on buses. So it's usually the first few weeks that are probably the worst, and some behaviors start to change after that in terms of logistical planning, but then also families do opt into buses later, in my experience with swing space.
So am I hearing that people are intrigued with the Simon Lake option, and that's, because it sounds to me like that might be the preferred option at this point, if it's possible. Is there anybody that just, I'm trying to narrow down to some things that we can.
Just to elaborate, by Simon Lake option, you're just saying exploring that as a site.
As a site that we would then use for the middle school piece, the West Shore.
And then close West Shore.
It would be the swing space for East Shore.
It would be the swing, okay, so, You could do either way, Live Oaks, JFK first, as we talked about. And I think, you know, we need to decide if we want to focus on elementary first or middle school first. But in this case, it doesn't, they could flip-flop. And then, so Live Oaks, JFK first, as it was described. West Shore would get rebuilt on the Simon Lake land.
And maybe do Orchard Hills at the same time.
So that's the second step, is West Shore rebuilt on the Simon Lake land. Which would allow West Shore, would free up West Shore, the current West Shore. And then we said 2A would be potentially doing maybe Orchard Hills, like stagger them a little bit, whatever. And then step 3 would be the East Shore piece. So in that case, East Shore would be able to swing to Harborside with the,
East Shore to West Shore.
West Shore. East Shore would go over to West Shore's building because it would be empty because West Shore's in the.
oh, right, okay. Did we say that?
Yeah.
Yes.
We talked about
We said
that
Harborside
and
or
Harborside,
Depending on what was the best for the moment.
yeah.
So it could be East Shore to West Shore, or it could be East Shore to Harborside,
Harborside.
and with half.
Mhm.
And then go on with the rest of the plan. after
And just
that.
to make sure it's out loud, so the Orchard Hills, they would swing to Calf Pen.
They would
Yeah.
swing to wherever is, we'd have to, I think the swinging piece would be something to decide at the time. It could be
They could go to
Cap
Live
Pen,
Oaks.
it could be,
Harborside.
no, they can't go to Live Oaks.
That
Some
was-
of them, some would, some could, permanently. I mean, we'd have to look at the redistricting at that point, but some Orchard Hills kids would have to swing, would have to be redistricted to Live Oaks at the greater capacity that Live Oaks would be, in order to make room for eventually Calf Pen to go into the Orchard Hills space.
So Orchard Hills would either go to Calf Pen, which would have to close, or to Harborside if Harborside
Or maybe
remains.
Meadowside even, it depends on when we retire Meadowside. I think there would be swing space available, I think it just is dependent upon what makes the most sense at that point in time for that piece.
It's also that's doing Orchard Hills at the same time after, I mean, that's if the city's gonna do 2 new elementaries and then build a new middle school and at the same time do an elementary school.
Ideal, but may not happen.
Yeah.
Well, but then Orchard Hills goes back to the original order that we talked about.
No, that's my,
Right, yep,
yeah, that's just me saying,
Yeah.
like, you know, we're saying we've built 2 new elementary schools, now we're building a new middle, because I think that's the priority next, right?
Mhm.
I think the expectation that the city, that we're gonna be able to do Orchard Hills at the same time, I think.
Is that the priority?
Well, I believe that, and I mean, I don't know that we've actually said that yet, but I believe that the original recommendation to do 2 elementary first and then 2 middle school makes sense to me. I think that's what I heard administration say would be their recommendation too. Is that what you guys just said, start with that there's more need at the elementary level?
Yes, that's correct.
Well,
So
no, I
we-
understand that, but again, looking at the FCI, all the middle schools are at the very bottom.
I think there was a I think on top of the
Programmatic,
FCI,
we're
there
talking,
was a
looking, it's not
programmatic.
just about FCI.
Yeah,
so-
there's programming, and I think you listed a couple schools that the programming was Live Oaks, Orchard, I don't remember what you just said. You said some of the elementary schools, there was programmatic needs that weren't gonna be able to be met.
I heard JFK, Live Oaks.
I think
Calf
that's what
Pen,
administration was talking about,
Yeah.
that there's more programmatic issues at the elementary level,
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, like, for
special ed,
instance,
stuff like that.
So you, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that East Shore and West Shore should happen before Orchard Hills? Is what I'm hearing?
What I'm saying?
Just a, yes.
No, you're talking, I'm just repeating what we talked about, what I remember we talked about earlier, saying that we could have like a step 2A and include Orchard Hills,
If they were
But,
willing to do
but that,
two
if the
buildings.
city is willing to do two, but that
Yeah.
Orchard Hills could also go after East Shore and West Shore.
I think the reason for the middle school instead of Orchard Hills was for the closure of
I was
Harborside,
gonna
so
say
that we
that.
could have the consolidation within a time frame of when we wanted to have it, so it wouldn't be on the chopping block or the school community closing for a period of time. It would provide the most efficiency of decreasing the number of schools within a short period of time.
But realistically, we can look at any order, but I thought that's what I heard most people leaning towards, but I'm not, we can all chime in on that.
I thought we were leaning, well, I know I'm leaning toward the elementary, the two elementary schools, and then obviously ideally West Shore to a Orchard Hills, then East Shore, possibly another elementary school, then two elementary schools and last high school. There's whatever order those, I think, I kind of see this as a framework, nothing set in stone, we just need a starting point to vote on, and then, just a general framework. Because it really, in the end, depends on what the city's willing to do.
Yeah, I agree.
We can just say we want to do two buildings at a time or stagger them this way, but we need this as a starting point. I think the elementary school, especially Live Oaks and JFK, since you can build on those sites,
Yeah.
make the most sense.
And I think it's important too to remember that when we say that, because here each piece is taken independently of one another on the city side. So it's an annual decision that they make. So it's very hard to say today what the city would be willing to do. So we have to have flexibility in what we, but can you maybe expand on the concern, you have a concern about, is it a concern about whether we do the order of Orchard Hills versus Middle, is that?
Well, I just think we should, Ms. Brown, I agree wholeheartedly that this is an aspirational framework, but I still think that we have a duty to make sure that the schools are in the ideal order we think is the right order right now, and then if future boards or other situations mean that we change it, future boards change it, that's fine, but I think we're aiming for the right order based on known. So my question is, if we're in a scenario where we are only able to do one school after Live Oaks and JFK get done, would we prioritize Orchard Hills or would we prioritize West Shore? I don't have an answer, I like putting it out there to the universe, because I think that it's worth, if Dr. Kataya's team is saying that our elementary schools are in critical need of, attention, and that our middle schools are okay for right now, and they all need work, I think we're all on the same page, but I think it's worth just looking again at, if this timeline is pushing us out years and years, does it make sense to prioritize Orchard Hills or West Shore, getting a new building on a
Can I
new
ask
site?
a related question? I guess I would also consider, are you programmatically and operationally, fiscally able to keep Harborside open that long? Or does the closure or consolidation of Harborside need to be factored in
I think
earlier?
that,
Yeah, what you
impacts
just
your
said.
decision is that I've been in Harborside and program-wise, I've seen the tech ed spaces.
It's different.
They are not, Harborside just does not have the program space. And so while I understand that when you look at this list, like these top schools, two of them will close. The middle school, Harborside, does impact the learning spaces of our special education students, which I always factor in when we're thinking about this. The special education spaces are important to me. West Shore, Harborside really does not have great spaces for it. And I think we were in there, and I said, one of the rooms reminded me of a prison room. And there was one little tiny window at the top. And it's not appropriate, to me, in a learning space. And then the tech ed spaces.
and science and.
Yeah, all of those spaces are just
They're very
not
outdated.
appropriate for middle schoolers, so I think that there has to be like a balance, even though like some of the buildings, they're all in great need. But I do think we need to get the elementary going and then at least start one middle school, because then if East Shore could swing over, if it's possible to swing over, you're at least now offering both middle schools an appropriate space for that, where Live Oaks is definitely a priority for this program space. Their special ed spaces, to me, are not appropriate.
I would put Harborside up before Orchard Hills, though. When I start thinking about the middle schools, so because Harborside is limited in physical space, I think it's coming to a point where we're holding all of our middle schoolers back, because we would not start exploratory career pathways in West Shore and East Shore and not Harborside. So we can't get a start on that at our middle schools until we catch, well, we're closing Harborside, but we need the physical space to start those. And we're not gonna put that in our capital improvement plan for just West Shore, East Shore, because then that would leave out our Harborside kids. So we're getting to the point where we're stalling on program improvement. So I think the most dire of the elementary school should be taken care of, but then swing to the middle programmatically, not just FCI, and then go back to the elementary. Makes sense from a programmatic perspective. Because if you do all your elementary first, then we're putting off, I think, middle schools by, 15, 18 years?
Would, I hear that, and I hear what you said. We're also talking about putting our little guys, our little kiddos into Harborside, right, for quite a long time. And I recognize that we probably wouldn't need as much space for an elementary swinging into Harborside.
Yeah.
And that we've already talked about some improvements would have to be made. But some of the things that we're speaking about, I want to make sure we're recognizing that we're, like, the rooms with really tiny windows that feel like prisons. Like, I think we just need to be cognizant of how that's coming across to the people that will then be swinging into that building. Like, would we not need those rooms? I mean, I know that those are really in the weeds questions, but I think that it's like worth,
I'm not sure how we got into Harborside being the swing space, because originally we were talking about Meadowside and Cap Pen would be the swing space for elementary school.
Even if you built new on the Live Oaks, and if you started there, you built new on Live Oaks and JFK, you now have 2 empty buildings that we did not plan for middle school. We're now saying middle schoolers will not be using those 2 empty spaces. Am I correct in understanding that we build
Empty
new
buildings meaning what?
swing spaces?
But which buildings are you
Elementary,
talking about?
JFK and Live Oaks now have.
But we also have Meadowside and Cap Pen, so.
Right, I don't think we need Harborside as an elementary swing space.
Oh, I would demolish
We don't want to
JFK.
demolish it.
But that's how we get our fields, and then you'd also have to double the population going in
I
and
don't-
out of
yeah,
that one
I-
campus.
I'm just not clear how we shifted to Harborside being the swing space, because we have Meadowside and Cap Pen as 2 elementary schools that can be swing space for the rest of the elementary schools. Because they are gonna get folded into the larger,
Newer elementary.
the larger JFK and the larger Live Oaks, along with the schools that are.
It certainly could work that way. There was some conversation about proximity for the Mathewson and Orange Ave schools being closer to Harborside from
Why not?
proximity.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation to have at the time of implementation, but I think we have to acknowledge that when you're talking about something, anytime you're talking about any kind of building, it could be, doesn't have to even be this magnitude, there's going to be some pieces of it that are not ideal. And so have kids having to go from the Mathewson area to Meadowside, they used to go, that's what they used to do when we had K235. Mathewson went to Meadowside for 3-5. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's not ideal, but it's for a year and a half of construction, or 2 years of construction, it's not, is it the end of the world? Is it enough to say we're not gonna do this, or that it doesn't make sense, I guess? But that was the configuration for K235. Orange Ave went to Cap Penn, and now that I'm thinking about it, and Mathewson went to Meadowside for half of their elementary experience.
Can you just remind us why Meadowside and Cap Penn were the two schools chosen to be closed?
Yeah, so largely it's the sort of property size and sort of limiting sort of opportunity in the future. So Cap Penn in particular, while that sort of total acreage looks like it's a lot, there's wetlands and then there's FEMA flood zone on that property, and it really reduces that property. So it really constrains what you can do long-term on that property. I think it gets to like 4.7 acres after you factor in the wetlands and setback in the FEMA flood zone. It's also the lowest enrolled school you have, so it's sort of minimizing long-term impact. And the same thing on the west side, Meadowside being the sort of smallest property on the west side, and we kind of like the balance of 2 in the east, 2 in the center, and 2 in the west. So they were sort of viewed in isolation geographically. So looking at the east side, you know, Cap Penn was the sort of least desirable long-term property, and the same thing with Meadowside on the west side.
So how can we narrow this down a little bit?
I think we're back at the original plan.
So except not 2 middle schools at the same time. I guess the only thing that's kind of altered.
We would
that,
ask
yeah.
if we
But
can
it
get
is the
this
original
from the
plan.
city.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the preferred option, if it will, if
Ideally.
we can ideally with the city, would be to utilize the Simon Lake property.
Yeah.
So we would do Live Oaks and JFK as per the original plan. And then West Shore would get rebuilt on Simon Lake, which would free up West Shore. And at the increased the current West Shore, at the increased capacity, West Shore could then hold all of the West Shore kids and half of the Harborside kids. They could all everybody could get sent to the new space. And then, based on what was just said, doing East Shore.
Yes.
And potentially using the current West Shore building as the swing space for East Shore and half of the Harborside population. And then moving on to the remaining 4 elementary schools.
And we also said if we don't get the new property, we'd have to use Harborside as a backup.
Right, so then that would be the next step. The contingent would be still doing Live Oaks and JFK as per the original. And then is this going back to the concept that we swing the
Across.
Yeah, you have
across
to-
each way
Yeah, and
for,
then swing back.
Yeah.
so only using middle school, the middle school's as its own swing space,
Yep.
which might need some portables.
I think it
potentially.
definitely will.
Yep. And then, so that would do both East Shore and West Shore, and then going back to the 4 elementary schools. Is that, Nicole, is that,
Yes.
Adam, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So that would be the 2 middle schools getting done at the same time?
No.
It would one at a
No,
time.
one at a time they
One at
have
a
to do,
time,
yeah,
But that doesn't include what we had said before about 2A, right, with
correct.
With
So
Orchard
2A,
Hills
based on what, based on
before
what they said
East Shore.
before, that would go, it would become the first school after the middle schools.
after East Shore.
Right, because, and that's just based on what administration's feeling was that the,
Even though we had said that we cannot do, in this plan, we cannot do West Shore and East Shore at the same time. So if we potentially could do 2 schools at the same time, it would have to be West Shore and Orchard Hills.
it could be, yeah.
You could, in theory, put everyone at Harborside and put a bunch of portables there at
I
Harborside.
don't think that, yeah,
900 kids?
no.
What do they, no, because West Shore is being built in its own separate place.
Yeah, but to do them
This is the
together.
fallback option where you don't have the new property, right? So you'd have to, you
have-
could.
We
with-
do have the new property. The new property has to be built before West Shore can move, before East Shore can move to West Shore.
Correct,
Right.
right,
So in that case, if, and I know it's an if we were able to have two schools under construction at the same time, it would have to be West Shore and Orchard Hills.
right, we could
And
move up
then
Orchard
East Shore.
Hills.
Right.
And I think what I would like to see, if we were to do this option, would be to state it as it would be the first school of the 4 after the 2 middle schools are done, but we could, as we do our capital improvement plan, because that's done every year, if there's some critical need, or if we're getting, after conversation with the city, they're amenable to it, we could move Orchard Hills up. Because you have to remember that we do the capital improvement plan is done every single year in 5-year spurts, and so everything rolls up, so. So we don't give, the city's not getting the full plan, they're getting 5-year increments of the plan as part of the capital improvement plan, once a year.
Hypothetically, though, for any of these when we're putting any of these plans forward to the rest of the city, ideally, we will have a large portion of the community who's advocating as champions for why we really need this, right? And so having a clear picture for parents primarily, I think would be valuable to, I mean, not saying, I don't know how this will eventually be formatted, but can there be an if-then scenario in the final plan that says, if we are able to do 2 schools at once, then this, if we are not, then this?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Because I think that rather than just saying, here's the plan, and we'll change it in a few years if X, Y, Z, I think it would be helpful to have a contingency already written out for that future board to figure out.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so that's doable. Is this agreeable to people?
Can you just say the order of the elementaries one more time after Orchard Hills?
It was Orchard Hills, Orange Ave, Mathewson, and Pumpkin were the.
Orchard Hills. Sorry, say that again.
Orchard Hills,
Uh-huh,
Orange Ave,
uh-huh.
Mathewson, and Pumpkin.
So it's different, just to be clear, that from what's on the
Correct.
official presentation, this is going with what Dr. Chai's team recommended for the elementary school
Right, and I
sequence.
assumed that was your question, and I assumed that you wanted to hear their recommendation to give deference to that.
Yeah,
So
no, I
just-
think, I mean, I just think it's good to be clear, because as people are maybe at home reading through the different scenarios, we're just switching it up a little bit.
And was that your intention, was that we should hear what their thoughts are and defer to that? In terms of the order of the 4 schools, or did you? That was just my assumption, was that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only one person, but I think I have a couple questions about the Pumpkin FCI. I know that FCI is not everything, but it is number 3 on our list by 2034. So I'm not saying we should change the order. I'm not saying I don't trust the recommendations. I'm just, at least I think we should talk about it.
I'm curious about Pumpkin Delight. So I've spent we were there when the construction was ongoing, because Ella we went to the resource center, I've been back. I mean, the Live Oaks feels much different than Pumpkin. I mean, I know it's, and maybe that's, I know that's just a feeling, but I don't know if you guys can maybe speak more to it. I mean, when you're looking at the comparison, Live Oaks is what number on the list?
No,
I mean,
Live Oaks
Live
is one.
Was one and
Live Oaks
Pumpkin.
is 1 and Pumpkin is 3. Like, I mean, am I wrong? Are they similar in condition? Live Oaks and Pumpkin?
You have to remember that the FCI is the,
Not just what
is
you
the,
see.
the guts
It's
of the
not just what
building
you see.
versus.
It's really the sort of the nuts and bolts
So
of
it's
the
not like
systems
the
and
painting
roof
and
and
things
the.
like that. I mean, Pumpkin's just totally
It's
been,
been redone.
Yeah.
had a, large part of it was rebuilt, but I think it's also been painted and stuff like that. So it's, I think
But,
it's
so the
aesthetically-
mechanicals though are
What the issue is.
old.
Yes.
So those were not replaced
Correct.
during the renovation?
And in the old part of the building, electrical,
Okay.
plumbing, and that's the one that we had the issue as soon as we
Right.
actually completed the project. A pipe went in the old part of the building, the original part of the building, so. And we go back to this, like, our facilities department does an amazing job of keeping our schools look great, right? It's the stuff behind the walls that you don't see, the pipes, the wiring, HVAC, those kinds of things are the needs that really kind of drive some of these cost factors and bring that FCI score up.
But
Prior to COVID, Orchard Hills was not one of our larger schools. And then COVID hit, and I think there was just a huge turnover of houses in that area. So Orchard Hills has been consistently in the top 3 larger elementary schools. And in 10 years, they're right up there with Orange Avenue. They're at 400 kids. And Pumpkin is going to remain under 300, and that's with preschool, right? So we have to, I think was discussed in one of our meetings, we have to talk about what's the strategy in preschool. So I'm not sure that we'll always have preschool just at Live Oaks and Pumpkin. So if you remove preschool from Pumpkin, now you're reducing the enrollment, right? And we had to move preschool out of Orchard Hills because they ran out of space. And if Orchard Hills pushes up beyond 400, again, I'm not sure, we'll have to remove some of our specialized instruction spaces from there. So to me, Orchard presents a population bubble that I think we need to address with a facility renovation or a new build that's going to be greater than what they have now.
And I think what I heard before was that there's not a huge difference between a 52 FCI and a 45, right?
It's not dramatically different.
So I look at the fact that Pumpkin just had a nice renovation, and so they have to wait their turn now. There is a hierarchy to some degree.
And then in the middle of all this, there would be programmatic improvements to the high schools based on recommendations from administration.
We hope.
Are we good to
I
move
feel amendable
these?
to this plan that you just laid out.
I'm open to this plan. That being said, I spent a really long time walking Johnny and Sally through each part of the plan in the last scenario, and so while I'm open to this plan, I feel like we as a board have a duty to probably do some due diligence in that. Like, so far, I just have a couple scribbles on my paper of the order, and just want to make sure that we really, this is a 20-year plan, think through each piece.
When you say that, are you referring to option 1 and the contingency, or are you referring to just option 1, the Simon Lake piece, or the whole thing, just so that I understand?
I'm totally open to this. I am just seeing it for the very first time right this minute, and I don't know that I feel like I can say for sure this is what I would vote on.
We're not asking that at this point. We're just asking,
Right.
what are we going to, we're trying to narrow down.
Sure.
So
But is this,
these 2 pieces, we have 2 things right now, a Simon Lake potential plan and a contingency plan that we're just trying to narrow down. And so you're okay with those being the 2 narrowed down pieces? That's the question I'm trying to get to, so that we can direct Patrick and we can direct administration on what their next task will be. which for him, it would be drafting these up, right? Is that what I?
Yeah, and I want to make sure that
Bring
we
them down and making sure.
cross all the
yeah,
Ts and dot the
yeah,
Is, make sure there's-
processing, I mean, we all have to process, understandably.
Yeah, make sure there's no red flags, like, we need to sort of map it out. Doing a lot of mental processing, I want to make sure we get it on paper. We also want to put some cost to it. Each sequence will have different sort of cost impacts. Understanding you may not be able to sort of follow through on every single piece from a cost standpoint, but I think understanding what is possible might help advocate for sort of one scenario versus other with the mayor's office, so a lot of that layer into.
My hope is that as we try to narrow it down, we're going to come up, there'll be a natural immersion of something that makes sense to everybody, or to the majority.
Is it fair to say that there was agreement that starting with high schools was not
Starting with
on the
high schools is
table?
off the table. We took it off
Not
the table.
building middle schools on Live Oak and JFK was also taken off?
I heard people not feeling that that was a good option as well.
I will not vote for that.
So it really comes down to sort of sequencing of elementary and middle in terms of how they.
Right, and
The
our.
original plan with the caveat.
Kind of, yeah.
With the
So it's
swing across the
better
middle.
swing space for the.
For me, that was the whole thing, to try to develop better swing space for the middle school piece.
I would like to know a little bit more about busing as well.
In terms of what the final product might look like? Or-
Well, I think correct me if I'm wrong, in this long-range plan, we are suggesting where the swing spaces will be. It may change in future
Yeah.
boards, they
I
could
think
decide
we
something
should,
different.
certainly with confidence in the first few phases.
Right,
I think obviously as things progress 15 years from now,
sure.
maybe it's sort of documenting a framework to make those decisions. But I think being clear, at least in call it the first half, I don't know what the right sort of split point is, but I think trying the specificity there, because it does impact sequencing.
Yeah.
So I think trying to be as clear as possible, certainly in the early to first half of the phase is important.
And you still feel, which I heard you say this initially, and I think you said it tonight as well, that in most of the things that we're talking about, it would be your recommendation that we're looking at swing space. I mean, obviously, if you're building a new building, you have to have swing space. So swing space is a kind of a common denominator for everything.
So given for any single one of these projects, either you're building a building on the property or students need to get off the property, I think I've shared this before, like, we're beyond just painting the walls, right? This is significant construction, and most of your properties are constrained where it doesn't make sense to keep people in the building. It also has significant, especially the middle and elementary levels, significant logistical nightmares of like, let's build this wing or this floor, and like, it's very difficult to do. You're gonna have quality issues, you're gonna have construction issues, you're gonna have safety issues. So when possible, I would always advocate to get students out of the building, unless you have safe area to build on the property, which we think JFK and Live Oak should too, that makes sense to do that.
So, one last thing is, I know it may seem like we jumped the gun to let's not renovate, let's rebuild entirely in this process. And then we did have a permanent schools meeting on Thursday, and one thing that came up was this discussion point about our actual, the inside, the HVACs and all of these things, is that the parts are just not available. And what used to cost $1,000 now costs $4,000, or multiply from there, they're 4 times the cost. So there's just that integration of, then you're stuck with the same footprint, and then you have mechanicals that are just, do not exist in the world anymore. And so how do you compound that? So I think that's why we've gone directly to this rebuild instead of like piecemeal, because I think the piecemeal strategy is how we got here. And we have a dire situation that will take many years to rectify to some level.
And I think I shared this on Monday. I mean, obviously you need to do what you need to do to keep the buildings warm, safe, and dry for students. Like, that's your number one priority. If you're gonna spend the amount of money needed to just get the systems updated, you're not changing too much around the educational experience, or you're not changing the layout of the building, you're not changing the sort of outfitting of classrooms, you're just sort of keeping the buildings as they are, which were built in the 50s and 60s. So if you're gonna spend as much money as you're gonna be spending on sort of system replacements, it's not my money, but I would advocate you should also try to make educational programmatic investments with there, which I think you guys have agreed on, but I think your dollar point to just maintain the buildings is so significant that you should just go a little bit further to make the sort of long range, programmatic.
And I think it's important to say again that we have a phenomenal maintenance staff.
Oh, for sure,
Keeps-
yeah.
Keeps our buildings, I mean, our buildings are safe, our buildings are, they've been very well maintained, but it's these, systems that are, in some cases, maybe held together with a Band-Aid or whatever, but that kind of brings us to a crisis period, but it's not a crisis in terms of the
Yeah.
buildings are,
You have great teams, yeah.
But I believe that in most cases, your cost estimates for the elementary piece, for building new and renovating were very similar, very close. There wasn't a huge
Yeah, renovators know you're
difference.
gonna save some money, but it's.
But it wasn't a huge difference, my
No,
recollection.
I don't know
so.
the exact amounts, but
And
yes, it was.
there were even people that made that point on when we had the elementary school piece, was like, well, the cost is so close, it makes sense to build new.
Yeah, and we did a renovate as new, so there's different scales of renovating. We could just sort of do a light renovation. We assume the renovate is new, which is basically you demolish everything inside of the structure and rebuild. So it's still a significant amount of work.
Right.
You just save a little money on your envelope and things like that. Foundation.
So in terms of next steps, obviously you need to digest and put all of this together.
Yeah, like I said, we'll map out what we've heard. We'll raise any red flags to Mr. Brennan and Superintendent if there's things that, hey, we weren't thinking about as we're standing up here for a few hours. And we'll raise them as soon as possible, and if we need to flag anything, hey, this wouldn't work because of X, Y, or Z, but what I've heard, I think, is achievable, and we'll just map it out so it's clear that everybody's sort of marching on the same.
So our next scheduled meeting is May 11th, our business meeting on May 11th. And I think the week prior to that, there's a lot going on. It's not really I think you guys are away, unavailable for part of it. And so it's looking like May 11th would be the next date that we can have more conversation about this. And, seeing that we are trying to narrow it down, I'm hoping that we can potentially entertain a vote on this at that point. I mean, I think we'll put it on the agenda as a potential. And I'm kind of envisioning it as being kind of like our last budget workshop where we have discussion, try to finalize any questions, and then have public comment, and then have take some action. Yes?
Would it be possible to try to find out about the Simon Lake property before we vote?
We can ask administration they can give us that update before then? Before the 11th, can you have
We were talking, I'm sorry.
So the
We didn't
question
get to
is,
I'm sorry.
would it be
We were talking
possible-
about this.
Would it be possible for, since May 11th is the next time we would be discussing this, would it be possible for you before that time to have an update for us on the reaction of the mayor and the city side of things to the Simon Lake piece?
With your direction, we're happy to do that, yes.
And are we directing Dr. Kataya to do that?
Yes.
I think with I don't know how these conversations go, but that, there has been significant community discussion about needing swing space for our middle schoolers. So, again, I've never been in that conversation before, so I don't know, but I think it would be helpful for,
We've been keeping it up to date. We have
Okay.
regular meetings with the mayor on all things school,
Great,
and so this is part of our agenda with him.
great, thank you.
And I think the Boys and Girls Club piece is part of that conversation, and I think you probably would have some information about that.
That was
In
part of our
terms
chat too.
Right, in terms of their their timeline.
Your timeline.
To, for the building next door that they're gonna be going into.
Right.
I
Have
think
they
it's,
started building that?
no, they haven't started building. I looked at their last, they have
I
a
drove by
building
there the other
committee.
day, there's no-
It's,
They've hit some road bumps
yeah,
themselves.
so they have not, they have an architect. That's it. So that's part of the conversation too.
If for some reason there's a delay, like, let's just say the city says, yes, you can use this, but you have to wait until X year, would that then change our order?
Well, because we're putting it second at this, it's still second, so it depends. We're not doing it first in this instance, we're still doing it after the.
Right.
It would depend on how far away.
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends. What,
Because if it's another decade, yes.
Right.
But if
That's-
it's,
that's what I'm
but it's
saying.
5
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
I
it
think you can
depends,
probably
yeah.
wait 5 years.
Right.
okay, so the answer to your question is yes. And,
Ms. Glennon,
yes.
what we were talking about is, did you get a list of everything they need? Did I get a list? So I'll just touch base with you tomorrow to
Okay.
ensure that whatever data or information you're needing, we're clear about.
So from you, I think the only piece is that.
Okay.
And then, have you made notes of?
Yes.
Exactly what we're asking of you?
Yep.
Okay, is there anything else that board members feel they need to bring up? Adam?
I'm just curious, you mentioned if you find any red flags, you're going to flag it with our admin. I don't know if it's, against any type of rules or anything, based on what information we can consume, not in a public setting, but I would love to hear about this, not at the meeting we're going to vote at. Sometimes it's really hard to, I mean, if we had a vote on a 120-page slide presentation tonight, I'd probably just abstain, because this is a lot, right? So I just don't know if it's possible to get updates from you guys over the course of the next 2 weeks. Like, legitimately don't know if it's allowed, is my real question. If it is, I would love updates.
We could get updates, we would discuss it, I mean, we'd still discuss it during a meeting, but we can get an update on that, I think, too.
It would just help me be more confident in voting on the 11th, rather than asking to not vote on the 11th, personally.
Yeah, I mean, we can work internally the next day or so to sort of just map out the scenarios we talked about and flag it for Mr. Brennan and Superintendent, and happy to
Maybe we
put it
could,
in a memo or whatever.
yeah, maybe we can get it in your hands, and that gives you some time to digest.
Cool.
And just for clarification, so, we're adopting a somewhat of a framework of a plan. You present it formally in a report after the fact. So clearly you need to know what we want to do before you can write.
I was gonna say, we've written the report 90%, it's the last sort of implementation
Okay.
chapter we need to get to, so everything is done except for this part, so we've documented all the conditions, all the sort of planning work early on around the different sort of decision points so far, so we are in good shape there, it's just how the puzzle pieces to come together is sort of
Okay.
the last chapter, which we've.
And then, as we've said numerous times, once we do adopt a plan, whatever that might be, the conversation doesn't stop there. And the board has more work to do at that point, but we also have a lot of other work to do. But there's certainly more conversation to be had going forward.
May I just say one more thing?
Yes.
Out of all the things that we talked about that are new, that our community has not had a chance to reflect on publicly, I would love more information about what it will take to bus from East Shore to West Shore. And that is not a negative comment, because I hear 100% they're spending all day in a building. We want it to be the best experience for the
Yeah.
day. But I do think that as a parent, that would be the biggest, out of everything we've talked about, that would be
Yeah.
the biggest red flag. And I would just love to hear, I don't know what data points you can get, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but what
Like what it would
can we
look
come
like?
up with?
Like what it would look like?
What it would look like, or
Timelines.
what, so I know we have guidelines that we abide by. You
Yeah.
mentioned 40 minutes, right? How many more buses would we need, or how many, I don't know. I know
So-
you had some like geographic mapping of where our students are coming from for each school. I don't know, does that exist for the middle schools? Yes, it does, right?
Yes, we have that. It doesn't necessarily route them on a bus, but it tells you how far they are away from
Right.
school.
Even just for the sake, even if it's information we've already seen, I do think that would be helpful to just re-present to show what we're talking about, because that could be significant.
Yeah, and I don't mind creating, we've not created a map from West Shore to East Shore. So we'd have to create, which is fine.
East Shore to West Shore.
Sorry, yes. But that's a quick and easy thing for us to
Yeah.
do.
And that was the second piece, that, I'm glad you said that, because I had it written down, but that would be the second piece for administration.
So we think it's a part of the answer is an easy mathematical equation as we're talking. It's the same number of buses plus a bus for every child that lives within 1.5 miles of the school. So we could calculate that part. And then Mr. Brennan had a great idea of taking the lengthiest bus route at this time at the furthest point of town on the east side, and have the bus company calculate after that run is done. Like if that run is an 18-minute run, from that bus stop, how long would it take to get to West Shore? So we could do some mock things like that, Ms. Edmonds. Would that at least give you some general?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's work on that for you.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything else that anybody is wondering about? Okay. I think we're in a decent place. Can I move on to public comment? All right. I will read the public comment statement, because we do have public comment on the agenda. Speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about the Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with the Milford Public School System. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted. Consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act, discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Public comment does not allow for two-way conversation between speakers and the board, but we welcome and appreciate your comments and opinions, and all will be taken into consideration. Please note our meetings are televised and live streamed on YouTube, and we ask that you state your name and address for the record, and try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. So tonight, public comment is on agenda items only, which is the long-range facilities plan. So is there anybody who'd like to make public comment? Okay.
So I go over there.
Yes, if you care to.
Hi guys, I'm Amanda Clark. My address is 58 Canterbury Lane. I talked to many of you at the last community meeting, and you guys suffered through several of my pitch decks. Sorry about that. You're gonna get a new one tomorrow, just warning. So, listening to these plans, I know it's long, I'll try to be brief. Middle schools should be first. That's my opinion. That's the opinion of the parents that I've talked to, because we don't want kids going through multiple moves into schools that are still not renovated over and over, going through the system. There's been a lot of new conversation. I think some of those options were better than others. I love the Simon Lakes idea. If that works, that's great. Jennifer Brown, you made a remark about how Live Oaks would be a bad site for middle school. I agree. Since my last conversation with all of you, I think Orange Avenue would be a better choice. And I think that it is very important that the students are not on the site while a school is being built. I think that is dangerous for elementary school students. It's distracting. It's not a learning environment that I, as a parent, can support. That said, the scenario most similar to the one that I, assaulted you all with was scenario 4, but that this version ignores using East and West as elementary schools after those middle schools are built. I think that's really important, potentially, because those schools are really good schools. They shouldn't be built next. And the fact that they were built next is what makes that swing not work, because those bigger schools compensate for Live Oaks and Calf Pen closing or Meadowside and JFK closing. Not doing that makes that plan not work. So, kids shouldn't be in the same space of an unconstructed, unrebuilt school over and over again. That's really important, and they shouldn't be in the same space as construction. Those are my two big remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So thank you so much for your continuing hard work on the long-term facilities plan. I just want to say publicly and remind all of us that this long-term facility plan was born out of a consolidation need. It was born out of a budget shortfall. And I think there's kind of a mismatch between the economic climate and the proposed plan that has to be addressed. And so I do think it's important that we offer forth what we think is an ideal scenario, because I think it's important that the sequencing makes sense on a step-by-step basis, as it will be determined by the city. But I also think we have to have plans for the consolidation as well as the expansion. The consolidation right now, we're talking about, sunsetting 2 schools, 2 elementary schools, but we don't really have a plan for those students. When I talk to board members about this at public meetings, there's the talk about them moving to Pumpkin, talking to JFK, but these schools don't currently have the space for them, and this isn't talked about. We talk about additional portable classrooms at the middle school level, but we haven't talked about it that it's going to happen at the elementary school level with the constraints of this project. I think we need a comprehensive plan for the consolidation as well as for this construction plan, and we really haven't seen it. I do hope with some of what we heard, and we heard a lot tonight, and I really want to thank you guys for just digging into more scenarios. I hope that in that conversation we can also come up with plans for what we think are the most likely outcomes, whether or not we get the money, whether or not we do not get the money, whether or not this can continue for 20 years or not. Parents want to be your partners in creating the best education for our children. Please educate us on how to do that, right? But I hope with what we heard tonight, maybe you would consider pausing on the closing of our elementary schools. Our elementary schools are actually the star jewel of our district. There's a contraction in performance at the middle school level. 7 of the 8 elementary schools got schools of distinction ratings, and I think this is something that currently works. So I heard what everyone said about the sequencing, but I think that has to be taken into account as the educational outcomes of our children, and it wasn't discussed tonight and hasn't been discussed in many meetings. Like I said, I'm a parent. I'm a Meadowside parent. I realize that makes me biased. But neighborhood schools really work. They do factor in the community. Community involvement keeps our kids, I really believe it keeps the education at a certain level, and it keeps our kids safe. And I just want to make sure all of that is addressed going forward. But I heard a lot of good ideas and a lot of good conversation tonight, so please continue to keep the public informed. And like I said, I'm happy to share with my neighbors any way that you guys have of how to keep them most informed about the changes in these sequences. Thank you very much.
Could we just have your name and address?
Oh,
for the
I'm
record,
sorry.
please? That's okay.
Barbara Donnelly, 52 Meadowside Road.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to address the board? Anybody? All right, with that, then I'll close public comment, and I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Anybody opposed to adjourning at 10:07? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so much. That's enough.